Good evening and welcome to the 32nd meeting for the Planning Board on Monday, March 24th, 2025. At this time, I'd like to now call the meeting to order and begin by introducing the members of the board and our staff. Is Cheryl here too? I just wanted to make sure.
I'm here.
Okay, great. Okay, Cheryl, if you'd like to start introducing yourself and we'll go around.
Sure. Cheryl Tagayas, Secretary.
Great. Jim?
Jim Davis, member.
Sean?
John Fahey, member.
Maggie?
Maggie Oldfield, member.
Great. And myself, Meredith Hall, serving as chair. Tonight with us, we have staff, Cheyenne
Frazier, Assistant Director of Planning.
and Julia.
Julia Getman, clerk.
Great. Thank you so much. So we've called this meeting to order to discuss MBTA zoning, but I did want to open it up and give an opportunity for those who would like to speak briefly to have an opportunity to address the board on this topic, if you would like. And I do see Deborah Felton has had her hand up. So why don't we start with Deborah, if you'd like to go ahead.
Sure.
Good evening.
Good evening. Deborah Felton, 20 Willoughby Road, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2. I believe it's reasonable to ask this body to schedule a public forum immediately to discuss a plan that will be compliant with the law. I'm concerned that we haven't had an opportunity to all of us be in the same room. It's in the public interest to use the results at a public forum to inform your decisions. And I'm curious that some members or one member of the planning board attended what Rep Driscoll said was Rep Wells said was a secret meeting with EOHLC. Practicing good government would necessitate you're sharing the results of that meeting with your fellow planning board members and the public. At our Springtown meeting will be here soon, and it was requested at our February town meeting that a plan be developed that complies with the MBTA Community Act. I think these deadlines are fast approaching. Will the planning board focus on the task at hand to develop a plan that complies with the law? Or are we heading to yet another expensive lawsuit? I think people in the town are willing to come together and work on a compliant plan, and I hope that we can work together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And I see Jill Clark has her hand up.
Hi, good evening. Sorry, my buttons are slow to respond. My name is Jill Clark. I live at 26 Harold Street. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 4. I'd like to echo some of Deborah's comments, but also just note that my understanding is that tonight Utah will be presenting on plans that are with 10% plans and 25% plans. And I would really ask that we stop wasting our time with a 10% plan. You're wasting taxpayers' time, you're wasting UTL's time, you're wasting your own time. We've asked over and over to be reclassified and have been repeatedly denied. And I'd like us to move forward with a 25% compliant plan. And as Deborah points out, as quickly as possible so that we can get to town meeting and come into compliance. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. And next we have Denny Swenson. You'd like to go ahead?
Oh, hi, thank you.
Okay.
Denny Swenson, 65 Green Street, town meeting member, Precinct 5, former planning board member. Thank you, Chair Hall and planning board members for your service and for this opportunity to speak tonight. I'm here to urge the planning board to have not only the 10% plan and the 25% plan, but to also create the 563 unit plan that is within a half mile with the UTL maps and locations. Having the plan that follows the math and the legal definitions of the statute and the language of the statute is very important. Before we branch into other discussions, we need to have the town covered with the statute compliant plan. I feel it will be helpful for the public to understand the statute and the original intentions of the statute. And if we were to get sued for any reason, as we're working through this process, I think that plan should be easily available to us as a town as part of our defense. We should demonstrate that we do have a plan of compliance with the statute first. This can be the building block to work from for other discussions, but it's a very good starting point.
Right on.
Excuse me, Brian, if you can mute yourself, there's someone else speaking.
Oh, thank you. So just that could be the building block to work from for the other discussions. I just thought that that was a really good place for the public to understand that plan and what the statute is all about. So thank you, Chair Hall and Planning Board, for your service and for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just before we go on, we are all in the same Zoom link, all in the same room. So I would ask, if you're not speaking, did everyone mute yourself, please? That would be great. And then raise your hand if you would like to speak. Thank you. Next, we have M. Grills.
Hi,
Welcome.
thank you. My name is Marcia Grills. I live at 30 Landon Road, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 1. And I'm calling in tonight to echo what Jill and Deb have already said. It is my opinion that we really spent a lot of time discussing a compliant plan, but really haven't taken a lot of effort to actually come up with one. And you folks promised that we would have one after the special election last year. So here we are a year later. And I'm really strongly encouraging you to come up with a compliant plan at the 25%, which it sounds like you're doing, because I really think that it's unfortunate that we have spent so much money so far of our precious tax dollars. You're all aware of the financial situation that we're in. And I also think that the state has really signaled to us and continues to signal to us that they mean business. And I think to do anything other is a waste of time. And again, puts us at jeopardy for more dollars being spent unnecessarily. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I see Tom Callahan.
Thank you. I appreciate your giving us the opportunity to speak tonight. Tom Callahan, 16 Orono Street, Precinct 4, town meeting member. So in the spirit of March Madness, let's look at the scoreboard. 119 communities are in compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. 24 have submitted action plans, and 6, Milton among them, are out of compliance. It's time for us to join the winning team here. The winning team is clearly the 119 communities that are in compliance. The winning teams are not getting sued by the Attorney General. So I echo the voices have come before me tonight and have spoke articulately about why we need a 25% compliant plan in front of town meeting in June so that we can meet the deadline set by the Attorney General and the well, not by the Attorney General, by the governor actually in HLC. So I encourage the work that's going into the 25% plan. And the last thing I will say is I just want to point out there's been a lot of publicity around Needham and Lexington recently. And I think it's really important to note that those towns are debating between 2 compliant plans. One that meets the guidelines that's set out by the state and one that far exceeds them. Yes, the Needham voters did reject the one that far exceeded the plans called for by the state, but they, even their no campaign, if you will, endorsed a 25% compliant or a compliant plan for that community. So I would love to see our town come together and endorse what the state law calls for Milton, which is a 25% compliance. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And next I see Eric Holkinson.
Thank you. Good evening. Eric
Good evening.
Holkinson, 583 Elliott Street. Thank you for having this meeting dedicated to this topic. I'll be as brief as possible since I've spoken on the topic before. But I'm very confused and concerned by this pursuit of this quote statutorily compliant plan of 500 and however many units someone seems to have reached as being necessary for compliance. The statute does not say what will be compliant, and we cannot deduce that. It is up to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, according to the statute, to promulgate the guidelines to determine compliance. It does not say that all of the land area within half a mile of a transit station must be zoned for multifamily or must be zoned for 15 units an acre of multifamily. I think that there's a debate about whether the trolley is subway station or rapid transit, and that's something for the experts to decide, not us. But to read into the statute things that are not there and then say that this is what will be compliant, I think is incorrect. And I think, to echo previous speakers, not a good use of our town's resources or anybody's time. An honest reading of the regulations says compliance is determined by HLC, and they have told us what we need to do to be compliant. And I would urge us to pursue that compliance as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think that may be the last hand. Yes, I don't see any others. So thank you. That will conclude our citizen speak. And now we can introduce Zoe from our consultant from UTEAL. And if there's anyone else from your team, let's introduce them as well.
Sure, can do. Good
Thank
evening,
you.
everyone. My name is Zoe Mueller. I've been the project manager and planner supporting the town of Milton on analysis. And I'm joined by my two colleagues, Matthew Littell and JT Keller, who have both been working in different capacities behind the scenes and joining these meetings for those of you who haven't been following along for the entire duration of the project. So we've put together a presentation today that responds to the various elements that the planning board had requested at the last meeting, looking at both the adjacent 10% plan as well as the current state guidelines around and regulations around the rapid transit community category that Milton is currently in. We also received some requests in the intervening time, so we'll go into those as well. Before we do that, maybe it'd be good for people to just see the faces of the rest of my team. So Matthew, if you want to quickly say hello, and then JT.
Good evening, everyone. Matthew Littell, I'm principal at UTEAL. I'm working with Zoe and JT on helping Milton find a path to compliance. And we've been doing this work in a lot of other communities as well. So thank you for having us.
Hi, everybody. My name is JT. Excuse me. Sorry about the echo.
JT's been running a lot of the numbers for us to get to today. And so with that, I'll share screen and we will proceed. Okay. Okay. So I gave kind of a quick overview of this. This is the sort of sequencing that we're imagining today. We're going to do a quick sort of overview to make sure everybody's kind of starting from the same place in terms of all of the information. And then we'll go into adjacent community hypothetical scenarios, as well as the rapid transit community scenario refinements that we've been looking at. So the first thing I just want to ground everyone in is timeline. So it's our understanding that we are moving towards a tentative selection of June 9th as the target town meeting date. That means we have essentially 2 months between now and then, and 1 month of working time because the warrant requires a month of notice. June 16th is also being considered, but it's best for us to plan around the earlier date for now to make sure that we're not relying on time that we don't have. So I just want to kind of point that out because what it means is we basically have 1 month of working time, and that's inclusive of any public feedback that we want to seek in that time period. And you can see here we've added in the scheduled planning board meetings that we're aware of for the remainder of March and April and May. So we can circle back to that at the end to kind of figure out what next steps are and our sort of cadence over the next month. And for those of you who may not be familiar, we are now working towards a July 14th deadline for submitting a compliant town meeting adopted plan to the state. I do also want to relay some initial findings from some of our recent coordination with the state around interpretation of some very site-specific conditions that Milton has. So Granite Ave from the get-go has been a really unique case because Granite Ave North is essentially isolated from the rest of the town. We did get some indication that the state would be willing to consider this as a standalone district because it has nothing that can be paired with it except for Granite Ave South. And Granite Ave South was eligible previously based on its inclusion in your housing production plan, which has now expired. So there's really only one remaining pathway for Granite Ave South to be eligible for use as part of a compliant approach. And that is if the DOT, the Mass DOT, which is the owner of that parcel, comes forward with sort of a demonstration that they are intending to pursue disposition of that property for the purpose of multifamily housing. So we're kind of coordinating to see if we can secure that commitment. But in the intervening times, it would be prudent for us to prepare a reasonable approach to substitute for Granite Ave South if in fact we're not able to get that DOT indication in time, and if it's not sufficient to make the state convinced that that publicly held land is in fact developable as multifamily housing. So that is an update for everyone on this call, including the planning board. This is the product of our coordination in the intervening time from the last planning board meeting to this one. With that, I'll share also a similar question that we posed to the state to get some initial indication of whether this is something that we should consider pursuing, continue pursuing and analyzing along with the planning board. So we had discussed previously the Truman Parkway properties as a sort of alternative sub-district to evaluate in our continued work with the town. And that includes both what's kind of commonly referred to as the paper mill site, which is on kind of the far side of the rail line along the waterway here, as well as a handful of properties that are sort of right along Truman Parkway. So there's two pieces that we wanted to get state input on for these. The first is the MBTA rail right-of-way and DCR property, whether it was possible to consider this district as contiguous, given that there is that, those two barriers to contiguity. And so we got indication that, given how unique this site is, the state is kind of open to, trying to work with us to kind of figure out how to make this be able to move forward. The main constraint that we should all be aware of in terms of planning for this site is that the only access to the paper mill site currently is a limited 1-lane driveway access that goes underneath the tracks. And So in order for this to realistically move forward as a development, it would need to be at a density that would be sufficient to pay for the kind of infrastructure upgrades that would be necessary. So it's something to just keep in mind. If it's zoned at a very low density, it will probably never move forward as a development. So those are the kind of the two bigger picture compliance sort of eligibility questions that we had for the state that we wanted to coordinate on before coming back to you with analysis that was impacted by these factors. Before I move on, any questions on that from planning board members or clarifications?
No, I think that's good.
I've got a question, please.
Oh, yeah.
Can you clarify, Zoe, the DOT site again?
Yeah.
Just run that. You lost me on whether it's going to be developed or the state is going to sell it, or you just kind of proposed, hey, if you sell this, it's sort of in play.
Yeah, happy to go over that. So as a universal across all communities that are, subject to this law, you have to demonstrate that it is on developable land, and publicly held land, institutional land. There's a couple of things that kind of fall in that category, are not by default considered developable because they are held by either an institution or a public agency that isn't part of the same kind of private market real estate sort of world that, can produce multifamily housing for general use. And so this parcel, because it is state owned by the DOT, it is not part of the private market right now. The DOT would have to elect to dispose of that property in order for it to enter into a situation where it could be developed as housing. And so while the state has sort of issued, essentially a mandate to all of its agencies to sort of do everything they can to dispose of property that's relevant for housing for that purpose, they need to see from the DOT that this parcel in particular is one that they think they can dispose of, that they want to dispose of, and that they're going to move forward with essentially getting this piece of property out into the private market in order for them to consider this developable land. You had a different route to sort of convince the state that this was developable land before, because it was explicitly included in your housing production plan, which is one of the ways that they allowed for some flexibility to finesse some of these issues that are very complex about ownership and sort of long-term real estate development intentions. But because that housing production plan has now expired, and there isn't a renewal in process of that plan, it is no longer a way that the town can navigate this particular issue.
Okay, but your feeling was that they might still consider North as a standalone.
Correct. Yeah.
And then they said they would, or they kind of might consider it. What's your feeling?
We still need to make the case, but they said they were open to it. And I think we can, we have a lot of really good reasons why that should be a unique case that's given unique consideration, given that it's physically isolated from all other parcels that could be combined with it as a district. And it on its own is less than 5 acres. So we're confident that we can make a strong case for it. And we can, as soon as we have a clear direction from this board about the combination of districts that you want us to pursue, we can submit that to the state more formally to get their feedback on that in a sort of more formally documented way.
Good, thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, with that, I'll keep moving along. The other refresher I wanted to offer, so there's kind of a shorthand that people have started using of the 10% plan and the 25% plan. So I just want to, clarify the 25% is associated with the rapid transit community category. That is the category that Milton is in today. The adjacent community is a hypothetical scenario we put together that was built around the state's sort of ways of calculating these compliance targets. So we put this together. These are the adjusted targets that would be associated with that hypothetical adjacent community scenario. So it's that 10% of your housing stock as a starting point for the calculation. That comes to 985 units as a multifamily unit capacity target. And then you no longer have a station area requirement associated with this scenario. The contiguity percentage of 50% is still applicable, and the minimum land area of 50 acres is also still applicable. So with that, we wanted to bring up another sort of scenario that was we had been asked over email between the meetings, and we wanted to bring it to the board to sort of clarify, make sure that we're understanding what you need from us, and to make sure that the planning board is all in agreement about how you want us to move forward with this. So on the left, you can see the text of the law. There's other kind of elements of the law that are not associated with the metrics. This is the portion of the law that describes the metrics that are in fact embedded in the text of the law versus the requirements that were then built out as part of EOHLC's designated authority to promulgate regulations and guidelines associated with this. So you can see in bold the things that are sort of related to metrics that then appeared in the regulations. District of reasonable size, that's not something that is enforceable in any specific way as a result of the statute itself. That is something that was elaborated on and made specific by the guidelines and then the regulations. But you do see in here the 15 units per acre and the reference to half a mile from a station listed as commuter rail station, subway station, ferry terminal, bus station. So what we understand is that there's a desire to look at this relative to half a mile from the commuter rail stations specifically. And I'll show you some analysis that I think this logic is associated with. And that half mile, if you kind of draw that half mile, that includes 37.5 acres of developable land. And then if you grab that 15 units per acre target, you multiply that by the 37.5, you get the 563 number that a couple people have mentioned today, and that was shared with us over email. So that's kind of the logic that we're understanding at this point. So I wanted to sort of take that back to the board as a whole and say, does this, one, do you want to move forward with coming up with a plan that uses these metrics that are listed here? And then two, are there any, metrics that you feel are missing from this or that we've misinterpreted in our understanding of what was asked of us? And then obviously there are the questions that were raised at Citizen Speak in terms of whether this is something that you feel comfortable using town resources and time on. So I'll turn it back to the board on that.
Great, Zoe, thank you. And maybe I can just speak to this first and then add any comments from the board. This has been something that has been asked by various members over time, looking at the 15 units per acre within a half mile of the commuter station. What I'm realizing is that as a town, what we need to do is we really need to come together behind the plan that will go to town meeting and work with the state on this. We have, just as we have tonight, people who spoke who are feel very strongly about the 25%. It's really important, I think, that residents understand that there are also residents who don't want anything and don't want any zoning done at all. And what will be helpful with this is that we can demonstrate that whether you want something or not, the SJC has found that the statute is legal and enforceable. So what is in the statute, I think, should be something as just a starting point that everybody comes together on, and that we can demonstrate the one district of reasonable size that's permitted by right, 15 units per acre. And we now know the calculation of that area is 37.5 acres. So that's where the number of the 563 units is coming from that land area. My understanding is that 50% does have to be contiguous. So 50% could be within that half mile, but the other 50% of the land area could be outside and could be in a district that we've already looked at along the Elliott Street corridor or down and off of Elliott Street in general, as just one suggestion. But so that is where I'm coming from is, if we can explain, this is what the statute says, this is, we can always add more. This is what we can do to be compliant, and try to work with the state on finding a number that not only can be passed at town meeting, but can be supported by the entire town. Because if the whole town can't support this, it doesn't matter what's passed at town meeting, as we've learned. So this was just a goal, a starting point in a way that that we can show step by step alternative scenarios. So, and the board members, I would love to hear from you as well.
So I have my hand up, Meredith.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Cheryl. Yep, go ahead.
I have a question for you and a couple of questions for Zoe. This approach was something that Tom Doherty has advised, he said, as legal advice to the planning board. And I've questioned whether town council or the town administrator has weighed in on this as some other kind of legal advice to the planning board. We didn't discuss pursuing this at our last meeting, and for you and Maggie to have asked UTIL to come back with something on your own, which the board didn't discuss at the prior meeting, I also find discouraging or disappointing. So first I wanted to ask if you had any discussion with town council or the town administrator about this, and then I have a couple of questions for Zoe.
So I think that's a very fair question, and that's why I was very clear when I spoke to Cheyenne. I have not spoken to Zoe directly, is that I did feel like it needed to be discussed with the board. So this was there was an email that was sent to us, but this is something I've heard from the other board members repeatedly. Maggie is primarily the one who has stated this. I've heard this from Sean. I've heard this from Jim. And as I'm thinking how we go forward with this, with the town, I think this would be an important piece to demonstrate based on what the SJC has said.
So
I've not
Meredith,
weighed in on legal counsel. I've not asked legal counsel.
Okay. That was just my question. If you've asked the town
I've not asked
administrator
legal
or town
counsel. I'm
council.
not relying on anyone's. We get opinions from a various number of attorneys. There have been other attorneys who've spoken to us. It's not anyone specific, but I do think it's something that is something that we all should agree on, is what is in the statute, because there's no questioning what's in the statute. The statute is fact. So
can I ask the two questions of Zoe? So Zoe, you've at UTIL have worked with a number of communities. Have any other communities taken this approach to looking at the statute for a way to determine what the zone capacity should be in their communities?
We have had several people mention it in public engagement, but we have never conducted analysis to pursue this concept, no.
And have you ever discussed this with HLC? It seems to me if Milton were determined to be in a rapid transit community, then I think we're looking at 400 acres using this math. And so is this, it doesn't seem as if this is a formula that's contained in the statute. It seems as if it's something designed here to come even below a 10%. Because the land area within 10% or within a half mile of the commuter rail stations is pretty low. So has anyone had any discussion, Meredith, you or Sean, who attended a meeting unbeknownst to the rest of the board, or you, Zoe, had any discussion with HLC regarding this way to interpret the statute?
Meredith, do you want to go first?
We didn't, this was not specific, and I'm not saying that this is all we should do. I want to make that clear. I'm not saying we should maybe limit it, but we all as a town, and for those who don't want anything at all, I think we have to demonstrate that the statute is legal and enforceable. And so this is we are absolutely required to do this as a minimum. So
This is all news. This is the first time where we've said that we're going to modify UTIL's contract to ask them to pursue a third path. I reviewed UTIL's contract. It says specifically a 10% and a 25% plan. We've got 1 month left to have a plan ready for a June town meeting. And now we're going to set about doing something that we haven't discussed with the public at all until tonight. You know, there was a discussion, we just had a town meeting where this was discussed. We had plenty of opportunity to talk about what UTIL's efforts were going to be. I find this just a distraction, and we need to really focus on 10 and 25% in the month that we have left. That's all I
understand.
have for
And
now.
I really almost see this as a subset of our 10% plan. I don't see this as anything based on what we've studied. This would be just really within our 10% plan and just showing, okay, this is in the statute, this is required, but it's a way to move us forward as a town together. And I think that's, you know, it may be small steps to get people, you know, to look at how much housing that we feel like the town would be willing to handle and can handle, from whether it's fiscal, economic concerns that people have. I think I listened to other residents, I've listened to the members of the board, and now we're getting towards the end. And I think this just would be a helpful part of our presentation.
Okay, so one last thing in response to what you said, Meredith.
Yeah.
The public should know that the state Supreme Court has ruled that the law is properly enforceable, and that the Attorney General could enforce it. If we go down a path that's not even close to something that's considered compliant, we're looking to have ourselves challenged again by the Attorney General at a time at which we're looking at an override. I think it's irresponsible to pursue this path.
Thank you. I respect your opinion. And Sean, I think you had your hand up next.
Thank you. I guess a few things that I'd like to mention. And I'll make my position very clear, because I think Cheryl has made hers very clear. And I think it's a responsibility that I have as a member of the board to make sure that the community understands my perspective. And I think I understand where Cheryl's coming from, although I don't agree with her. One thing that is irrefutable is that we are within a half mile of a commuter rail station. We've had plenty of discussion about the fact that we are not within a half mile of a subway station, or for that matter, a ferry terminal or a bus station. The statute, as the SJC had outlined in their decision, is enforceable. It is law and it is enforceable. So what we definitively know is that the 38 acres or 37 and a half acres that are within this area that is on the screen right now, we would have to create zoning that would allow 563 units to be built. That is irrefutable. There is nothing that will change this. And there are plenty of opinions, varying opinions on the guidelines, but there are no longer any varying opinions on the statute. This is absolutely 100% clear. I think it would be smart of the town to be prepared with both this particular zoning component that would allow us to comply with a commuter rail station designation. I think it would be smart to have a 10% plan, as we have described in the previous two meetings, which was something that we've discussed at length. And I think it would be smart to have a 25% plan. As Meredith said, there were residents in the town that would like 0, and there were residents in the town that probably would like more than 25% if there was a way that that could actually happen. So I believe that it's our responsibility not to ignore what could be a designation. If we did pursue a court decision on the rapid transit community, and if we were to be found not to be a rapid transit community, we would need at that point to have in hand a zoning plan that would be consistent with what would be the outcome, which is a commuter rail station. So to me, and in my opinion, we not only does it make good sense, in my opinion, we have a responsibility, and we have a responsibility to represent the interest of all the residents of town, not just the handful of residents that spoke tonight. And I know there's more than a handful of residents that have the same opinion as the handful of residents that spoke tonight. But there are also many, many residents that do not prefer a 25% plan. And we cannot ignore their interests. And I won't ignore their interests. And I'll close with this. HLC is aware of this zoning that could be created from a designation of a commuter rail station. In the meeting, one of our political representatives had asked for the conversation to be kept confidential, and I am going to comply with that request. But I will say that yes, HLC is absolutely aware that this is a responsibility that Milton would have should Milton pursue adjudication of our designation. And I won't speak any further on that. And the last thing I will say with respect to a zoning plan, I was glad to see that Zoe presented the possibility of some relief from the 5-acre minimum. And I think it would make good sense for the board to consider the variety of sites that we might have. The paper mill site happens to be one now, 2 Granite Ave, which Zoe talked about earlier, this 563 units, which are an absolute must if we were to consider ourselves a commuter rail station, and a number of other areas in town that would be palatable for zoning and palatable to the vast majority of residents in the town. There are certainly some areas that are more sensitive than others, but there are some areas that are less sensitive. And, it would be in our best interest to consider all of the possible sites. And even if we couldn't comply with the 5-acre minimum, let's develop a plan that has the 563 plus potentially the 2 Granite Ave plus the paper mill site plus the number of other sites that we've talked about that seem to be palatable to the community as a whole. I'll stop there, Meredith, and turn it over to someone else.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. Maggie or Jim, if you want to make any comment on your opinion.
So I agree with everything Sean has said, so I don't want to reiterate. I just want to say that the statute plan has not been a distraction. Since 2023, I presented to the planning board a statute compliant plan that I was comfortable with. And you guys didn't think it was enough. It was right around this 563 plan. And I reviewed it and I increased it to 700 units. And the board didn't agree with my plan. So this statute plan has not been a distraction for me at all and through this whole process. So I have personally been frustrated that I believe that I've been dismissed. And I am happy to see that it has some legs to it. We all know that we all want to do something. Like we all want to do something for a variety of reasons. And our town has sites that we all can agree on. And as I've said all along, why don't we start with all the sites we can agree on? Because there are many. And I think we need to get a win, several wins so we can get some momentum. So I am thankful that, Zoe, that I emailed Cheyenne and Meredith after our last meeting last week. And I said, I just would like to see a plan. So I'm thankful for you, Zoe, for taking the time and doing that. And I think you'd be surprised what we come up with. And then we all can feel good about it. We all know that there are great opportunities in town for some redevelopment. And we just have to get there, and we have to get there not just as a board, but as a community. And we all have to live with it, and certain neighborhoods have to live with it more than some of us. So thank you, Zoe, for doing that.
Thank you. And Jim has his hand up. So go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I too agree with Sean and Maggie wholeheartedly. But I just want to touch on, regarding Tom Doherty is some legal advice. I mean, he's not a lawyer for us, but I can't say it enough that we're very beneficial as a town to have someone with that knowledge taking the time to spell things out. I mean, I never would have seen some of this from that angle if it wasn't for him. And I think he just brings sort of pertinent info to the table that has to be considered, has to be explored. And you never know what's going to happen in the future, but having a plan that sticks to the law and is actually the statute as written, those 3 sentences, which is what the legislature intended, I think is a great foundation. It's not time wasted. It's a good foundation. We can build on a 10% plan from there. And then if it comes down to it and we have to do a 25%, we take our 10% work and build a 25% plan. So I don't think any of this is wasted. I think, once again, it's just a foundation, and I think it can happen very quickly. And I mean, I got to apologize to Maggie. I remember when she put her plan forward, and I didn't take it seriously. And I'm sorry, Maggie. You're right on. If we had done this earlier, maybe we would have brought a lot of the town together quicker. We wouldn't have had this ridiculous division that we have. And I think this is worth pursuing. And I think Sean's idea of 563 plus some of the other parcels is low-hanging fruit. Another great idea. So let's pursue this and get this going. All set. Done. Thank you.
Okay. So Zoe, thank you. I do appreciate your putting this slide in because I wasn't sure if it was going to be included or not. But I think it is. I think the board does support this. I would love to see it. I know we've extended a contract with you, expanded the contract. I would hope that this would be something that would be take you a very little time based on the work that we've done, and that you could do it as a subset almost within that 10% plan without increasing the budget. But I know you would probably have to discuss that with Matt and the others.
Yeah, we'll look into it.
Okay.
For kind of the board's understanding, one of the, for even though we've done a huge amount of work with you, obviously, and most of it associated with the rapid transit category requirements, those of you who have been doing this, for the whole duration, have developed an understanding of it. There's a lot of it is about balance, and that balance is completely recalibrated each time you change the parameters that you're designing to. And so the piece that is time consuming is setting up that new framework and all of the rebalancing that then comes from it. So it is absolutely, there's lots of things that we can reuse from the work that we've done with you already. We'll just have to look into a little bit of, how much it shifts that to understand, does it fit within the budget that we have right now? I think frankly, at this point, my concern is less about the budget and more about the time, because we really have a month to work. And in that month, we have to accomplish all of the, if you're keeping these kind of three broad scenarios, and each of them have sub variations, right? Alternatives within those scenarios. That's a lot of decisions to wrangle in 1 month's time. So I would say that's my main concern at this point. I think we can figure out the, scoping and budgeting stuff. We'll look into it and get back to the town with a clearer proposal around that. But I think I would urge the planning board to be focused and thinking about if you are choosing to pursue all three of these scenarios and you are still trying to get public input on them, we have to be really efficient tonight, and we need to plan another meeting very soon to confirm those any final sort of tweaking that we're doing to each of them. So I think that's I think at this point more of a constraint than the resources alone.
Great. I couldn't agree more, Zoe, with you on that. I think we had discussed, and we should probably set, before we conclude tonight, set a date for, we talked about late April, a public forum, so people will know when that's coming, and then work back from that on making sure we have the time we need. And I agree tonight, that's really, it's great that we can just dedicate this meeting to MBTA so we can be efficient and get as much done tonight as possible.
Great. I think with that, if everyone's ready to keep moving, I just wanted to, for those that, this was a little while back that we presented this analysis that helped to get to that acreage calculation number that was the basis of the numbers we just looked at. This is the commuter rail stations that have some area associated with them in Milton. If you kind of zoom in, you can see a little bit of the parcel fabric that they touch. There's quite a bit of, right of way and natural area that is included in that station area. If you remove that excluded land, you get to that 37.5 number that we talked about a few slides earlier. We did kind of zoom in. These are the north arrow is skewed for these so that you can see them all on one page. But you can see kind of the fabric that they absorb. I will point out that these areas are predominantly single family homes, much like some of the other areas that we've been looking at for a longer period of time, like the Elliott Street corridor and Blue Hill Parkway corridor fabric. So these are, when we talk about commuter rail station area, these are the areas that we're talking about. And obviously there's, room within that to think about, there's lots of individual decisions to be made within this area, but I just wanted to make sure that was anchored in people's minds in terms of the parts of town that would be involved in this scenario.
It's all West Milton.
Correct.
All in West Milton.
Well, that's closest to the Hyde Park commuter rail station.
Okay, so I think with that, I'm going to move along to the adjacent community scenarios. So this, as a reminder, coming off of the last planning board meeting, we agreed to look into a hypothetical adjacent community scenario that started from a base of this set of districts that you see listed out here. I'll show them in just a moment. It includes the set of districts that were around Milton Station, the district around Mattapan Station, the Elliott Street corridor connecting the two, and then the Blue Hills Parkway corridor sort of going south from Mattapan Station. We were also had direction to look at 711 Randolph Ave and Truman Parkway as potential additional districts to kind of fill out the approach, and an interest in reducing the Elliott Street corridor to exclusively focus on parcels that front on Elliott Street. So I'll just move through this. It's kind of a sequential thing, so bear with me as we kind of get to the punchline here. So the first move is to remove the Granite Ave sub-districts and the East Milton Square sub-districts, and then focus in on this area here. When we do that, this is just kind of, sequentially, moving down kind of the impacts of these moves. You can see that we drop below the 15 units per acre density. That's not surprising because we've eliminated 3 districts that were higher density and we've retained districts that are lower density. You can also see that we're well over the unit target that is associated with a hypothetical adjacent community scenario. So that obviously, in a world where you're planning to that number, that's probably not what you're looking for. And with that in mind, we thought that the area where we saw the most opportunity to kind of bring it closer to that 985 number is looking at the mandatory mixed use districts. Those are the Milton Station districts, because the way that the mandatory mixed use districts are incorporated into the compliance model, they count towards unit numbers, but they do not count towards the rest of the compliance metrics. So they don't count towards your density, they don't count towards your acreage. And so in this scenario, they're no longer helping in the way that they were for the rapid transit. So this isn't like conclusive. We're not saying this is the correct sort of way of thinking about this, but just to help you understand kind of this new balancing act that we're looking at. If we look at removing that set of districts, removing the Milton Station districts, in order to retain their ability to be mixed use, mandatory mixed use districts, but not, have them embedded, enmeshed in the MBTA communities, the specifics of the MBTA communities requirements. We looked at what would it look like if we removed those, for similar reasons to what we've talked about elsewhere. Once you've removed these, the Milton Station Bridge district, which is this pale green district here, would no longer be a viable district because it would then be less than 5 acres and would not be contiguous with other districts. So if we looked at, the impact of that move, again, not saying this is the right move, but just like what does this add up to? We're still struggling with density, but our unit numbers have come down. If we then take a look at the Elliott Street corridor reduction that was requested at the last meeting, this is sort of a reduction. We can kind of, if we were to pursue this further, there's like fine tuning that we could do, but this is basically the concept that was talked about last time. You can see that in the blue, and the black are the parcels that have been part of the Elliott Street corridor to date, but have been removed for this revision. Most of those are larger parcels, and so the remaining parcels tend to be a little bit smaller. This shows you what that impact is. So we now have our below unit count by a bit, and we are below density by a bit. So we need something to kind of bring things back up. So there are 2 ways that we thought about doing that. Well, 3 actually, really, one of which we assume will not be of interest, but just to sort of for the sake of argument, so you can see kind of the full range of how this could, how you could kind of rebalance the numbers. This one stays very close to the compliance targets, but releases some of the constraints that we've been refining together on Elliott Street corridor. I imagine for many people, this will not be something you want to explore further. But this is just to show you like what would it take to have this combination of districts get you to the targets. So it would look at, releasing the FAR constraints a little bit so you can have a little bit more bulk on those parcels, and then allowing more units. So a maximum of 6 for the smallest parcels, 8 for the middle ones, and 12 for the larger ones. We imagine this is not a version that the planning board is going to want to pursue further based on our prior conversations, but we wanted to give you a frame of reference for what that would require. So now we're getting to the ones that we feel like are, maybe a little bit closer to a balance that might make sense for this scenario. So this is where you add back in the Milton Station districts, but you add them in as residential only districts. In other words, you can still allow mixed use, but you're also allowing residential on its own to move forward. That enables you to then benefit from the density boost that those districts give you. Whereas when they're mandatory mixed use districts, you don't benefit from the density, you just get the units. So if we calculate them, the numbers with these, the Milton Station districts added back in as residential, mixed use optional districts, we're now comfortably over the density and comfortably over the compliance target, but not, way off the mark the way that we were when we were looking at the first versions. So there's still, room to fine tune here, but we wanted to kind of present these options before we discuss further, which of these is the most appealing. And then the last option that we looked at was, okay, we let the Milton Station districts be their own custom zoning project. The planning board and the town can pursue that at a later date without the constraints of 3A. And we look at what districts could be added back as multifamily residential districts that could help with the numbers overall. The two that seemed best suited to that for a variety of reasons were Granite Ave North as a standalone without Granite Ave South, and 711 Randolph Ave. When you add those two in, we're now riding a little bit closer to the density, 15.7, still comfortably over. And then again, riding a little bit closer to the unit count target in this hypothetical scenario at 1,099 units versus 985, which is the target that we sort of came up with for the adjacent community analysis. So I will stop there. I think that's the last that we have within the adjacent community. Yeah. So any reactions to that set, ones that are more of interest, less of interest?
I have a question, Zoe,
Mhm.
Meredith. These Elliott Street corridor, the tier 1, 2, 3, is that the boundary that we had been working with, or is this the paired back boundary?
This is the paired back boundary. So starting from this spot, so you can see they're not right next to each other. It's not immediately parent, but you see the numbers here, 47, 20, 14 for acreage, right? And then here they drop down to 20,
Okay.
0.9, 5.4. So from here forward, all of the alternatives that we looked at showed that we're using that reduced Elliott Street corridor.
So do you have a map that shows that last scenario that you showed, which includes 711 Randolph Ave?
Not altogether, but I can jump to a map that we can use to approximate that. Sorry for flying through this. So this is showing all of the districts that we've been considering to date that are in different colors on this, on the top of the graphic here, and then in the cyan color, the sort of teal-ish color, you can see all of the other sub-districts that we were asked to look into. So for reference, if we were to do 711 Randolph, that is number 3 here, wait, hold on, that's 3.
Number 4.
That's 3, 4, number 4, yep. So it's over here. So that's the 711 Randolph site. And then obviously Granite Ave North, what we've been talking about would be here. So it would be, mostly concentrated in this part of town, but then with a small site here along Randolph and a small site at the northern border with Boston on the east side of town.
And can I ask a question on your 711 Randolph Ave? You had 195 unit capacity.
Yes, that's right. I'll jump back to.
So I think what is being built is 90 units.
That's correct. Yeah. So
an increase of 100 at that site.
Yeah. And that's what, in order for it to, this is where we could do some, you can see there's a little bit of room here with that 15.7, right? We could use that, we could get closer to 15 and bring the units down a little bit at 711 Randolph. But I think no matter what, I think we're going to end up, in order for that to serve a role that's useful in terms of, providing a little bit of a density boost relative to some of the other districts that are more constrained by parcel size. I think you're going to need more than 90 units there for it to be useful to you.
So another thing just to point out, Zoe, for those who may be tuned in or who are joining us here tonight and who may watch this later, the Blue Hills Parkway corridor in this scenario is unchanged from what it was in 2023. Is that right?
That's correct.
So,
I believe the only change that we made since 2023 is we changed the 6,000 square foot minimum. Both the tier 1 of Elliott Street corridor and the Blue Hills Parkway corridor, we've kind of kept those in lockstep with one another as we've been making changes. So we've dropped that minimum lot size from 7,500, which is what it was in 2023, down to 6,000 for both of those. But other than that, the geography is unchanged. The other metrics are unchanged.
Okay. So I'll offer my opinion. Can you go back to your one that you said you didn't think would be favorably viewed? I just want to say that I don't see that as being a good solution, because I think that will incentivize tear downs of all the single families along Elliott Street, which is not one of the goals that we had, and I think it won't find widespread support. And then if you go to the next one. Sorry, was that you, Meredith? You said you
Yeah, I was just
that?
agreeing with you on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And wait, while you're on that slide, of the tier 3, the 15,000 square foot lots, how many lots meet the 15,000 square foot minimum lot size? How many properties?
Much fewer than before. Maybe JT, could you look that up while we're talking?
Well, it's 104 units, and if it's 12 per, could you just do the math and say it's probably
not like a perfect one for one, because there are some that might have other constraints that make them it may very well work out just that way, but there also are some things that could mess up that way of thinking of it.
Okay. And then on the next one, I don't support having not having a mandatory mixed use, because this is our business district area. And I just feel as if we have thriving businesses in this area, and I wouldn't want to see those be lost. So, and I think that was, again, one of the things that we had talked about, is not wanting to lose business opportunities. So I don't think this is a good option either. So I think your third option is the one that has the most promise. And I think my recommendation would be to talk about any refinements that we might want to see in this one.
I would agree. And I'm just looking at the Elliott Street tier 2 and tier 3. If we dialed that to 3 units, even across the board, the 10,000 and the 15,000, would we be able to stay within our unit capacity?
I think we would probably, I think that might work. I'd have to look a little bit at the density impacts of that. Let me pull
it
up.
might help us with that density, the model density.
But would it mean that we couldn't take any away from 711 Randolph Ave then?
Yeah, we'd have to look at what we could do there.
That is the trade-off, I think, is I imagine that within this set of districts, if we're kind of, thinking about ways of refining this scenario, it's about, for 711 Randolph Ave and Elliott Street corridor, like, how do we manage refinements for those two in relationship to one another?
Right.
And if there's I think right now what we're showing for the Elliott Street corridor numbers, those are consistent with the metrics that we've discussed at length for the rapid transit scenario. Obviously, there's different constraints for that scenario. So it's not the same, the same numbers relationships. But if the planning board feels that those metrics are sufficient, we might focus our reductions on the 711 Randolph Ave site. If there are further refinements within Elliott Street corridor, then that probably means that the Randolph Ave needs to stay closer to the numbers it's at right now. But we see some things change in Elliott Street corridor that might help, build buy-in in those locations within town. So I'll leave that sort of trade-off to the planning board, and we're happy to follow through on whatever balance you feel would be most effective.
So I would want to reduce the numbers at 711 Randolph Ave, because we have to remember that across the street is another 40 unit 40B going up. And there's also some land next to that 728 Randolph Ave 40B that is open, that's always been up for discussion, that probably would be developed at some point. So I think that little area of Randolph Ave plus the corner lot, which was the gas station, and currently there's a 7-Eleven convenience store. That corner is probably going to get developed too. So I think that end of Randolph Ave is going to see a lot of development in the next few years. So I would want to see the number at 711 Randolph Ave reduced. And the question is, if we add, I don't see it here, but adding like the paper mill and some areas on Truman Parkway, are you going to introduce that at some point into this compliance model?
So we stopped here because this sort of holds true for all of the different scenarios we've been looking at. As you add acreage, because you struggle with density, because there's a lot of reasons why you're trying to hold density down in certain areas, adding more districts tends to result in exceeding your unit targets because you need to do them at a certain density, and then that tips you over the unit numbers. I did just do a quick calculation, and I think you could put 711 Randolph Ave in at 90 units in this scenario, and you would still be okay on the compliance targets. I'll want to do a follow-up confirmation of that to just double cross-check all of the ways where the formulas could be the wrong thing, but I think that could work. That would bring you down, again, if my math is right, it would bring you down to 994 units there. So 9 units over the target that we've developed, and 15.5 density. So still comfortably over the 15.
So we do have the map of the 711 Randolph Ave in this slide deck somewhere.
Let me escape out of there for a second. So this isn't super zoomed in, but this is right here. And then if I toggle back from there, so this is the sort of the context for it. There's a sort of wetland area here. That's what you're seeing cross over the slide there. And then we have here, this is like the larger context that it's within.
So we have the 240Bs, which are already at a density, a certain density level. And at one point, I think we talked about crossing Randolph Ave and picking up the other 40B and the larger parcel adjacent to it that Maggie was referring to. It seems to me if we think that parcel's in play, we should zone for it rather than have it go through a 40B process. And so I think it could have been in 2023 that was one of the Randolph Ave sub-districts that you had looked at. Does that ring a bell with you, Zoe?
Yeah, I think there was, I'm trying to remember which exactly it was, but yes, there were some other Randolph Ave sites that we evaluated in 2023 and did not move forward with because they didn't help with that scenario. And there were other issues that were raised at the time, I think. It might have also been related to the number of units they would need to be at to be helpful was well over the 40B and therefore didn't feel like it was a good match.
I recall that. Yeah.
Did you ever look at dropping down to 5,500 square foot lot sizes in Tier 1 on Elliott Street?
We did. We didn't do like a full test of it in terms of its relationship to the whole compliance model, but we did do some typical parcel test fits, and it is possible to achieve it fits. It's tighter on open space, that was kind of the lever that I think, we were looking at. We tested at 5,000 and at 6,000. I don't think we tested at 5,500. But that was the rationale, is that at 6,000, you are able to retain a healthy open space percentage in addition to accommodating parking and 3 units.
Just seems like if we want to reduce tier 2 and tier 3 and then get 7-Eleven Randolph down to 90 or I was thinking 125 at 7-Eleven, you probably would have to go lower on tier 1. And then we'd have to adjust the FAR and sacrifice a little open space, is what you're saying? I think
Yeah, so
huge there.
Just for like ease of seeing this in apologies for seeing me do formatting, but hopefully it'll be helpful.
No, please.
This would, if we drop Randolph Ave down to 90, this would come in at 14.1 density. This would drop down to 15.5. This would drop down to 994. And that, you can then kind of see we have like only really 9 units of margin there, right?
Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah.
So we can make some, we can get some gains in the Elliott Street corridor, in terms of like number of units if we drop this from 6,000 to 5,500. But in terms of just like achieving the numbers, I don't think you need to, unless there's another place that you want to cut and you need to do something to enable that.
Yeah, I just heard tier 2 and tier 3 going down to 3 instead of 4 at one point in this conversation.
Yes. So if we did want to do that, that would bring into play, I think, we wouldn't be able to get 7-Eleven Randolph down all the way to 90 unless we were gaining some units elsewhere. I do think we did test fits at the 10,000 square foot lot size level for 2 different types of, and I might be able to bring them back here just so that we can look at them together more easily to jog memory. But we tested at 10,000 square feet lots, both sort of a deep, narrow lot and a more square proportioned lot at that size. And they comfortably fit 4 units with that open space percentage, within, footprints that are not so far off the footprints that exist today. And again, those are, when we're doing the test fits, we're making sure that a 1,000 square foot unit, that 4 1,000 square foot units can fit there. The reality is that many people build units that are smaller than 1,000 square feet. And so in terms of thinking about tear downs, right? Like it's not necessarily going to, the 4 unit doesn't necessarily encourage that because it can fit within some of the size of the properties, the developments that exist there already.
So
I'm thinking more of the parking.
That's what I worry about, is
right?
A lot of those are large properties on small lots with very limited parking.
Well, the problem is as you get to 4 units, now you have, in my opinion, the unrealistic expectation that you're going to rent 4 units to 4 people with 1 car. And it's just not going to happen. Chances are the majority of those tenants are going to have 2 cars, so where do you put them? It's a problem at 3 units. It's going to be a bigger problem at 4, no matter how big the lot size is, if we're not allowing the parking. So if you
just out of curiosity, Zoe, could you show us, if we did went to 3 units in tier 2 and tier 3, where we would need to be on 7-Eleven Randolph? Because I hear what Maggie's saying, but maybe we could compromise and do some of both.
Yeah, I'll need to go one step further into my various suite of spreadsheets to do that. I might need JT to do that for me.
You've gotten very good at this, Zoe, so thank you. This is
just to remind folks, this is the 6,000 square foot parcel. This is the test fit that we did of a building footprint that would fit within the setbacks that we included in the zoning in 2023 that would most likely persist for the any revised zoning that we did, that are very contextual. They match what is there currently. This is.
Can I give you a few comments on it though? No,
sorry.
I think that was
Yeah.
Yeah, keep going, Zoe.
So this just shows you like the open, so these are the three, this is for 3 units on a 6,000 square foot parcel. That's that smallest parcel sized here. This shows you that this would achieve an open space percentage of 50%. So you can kind of tell within that, right, that you can still, our metrics are 40% open space for this district. That's consistent with the current zoning as well, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly. So you can see there's a little bit of room to play. So to your point earlier, Jim, I think going down to the 5,500 is feasible for this. And something that's been sensitive in the past in our discussions. But I think that, in terms of just does it fit? Can you do it while accommodating 1 parking spot per unit? Yes, I think you can.
I would just bring up, though, that if we think about most of the properties along the Elliott Street corridor that might be this size, they already have a single family home or a 2-family home on them. And to get the 3rd unit and get the parking in, it may not work out ideally to these diagrams, in which case then we're looking at a tear down. And so the slightly larger parcel gives a little bit more room to do the addition that would allow you to get to 3 units without doing a tear down. And that's the piece that I think a lot of people would be concerned about, is to incentivize tear downs along the entire Elliott Street corridor. And so I don't think going below 6,000 when we don't need to is something we should do. And I'd like to make sure we have enough time for the 25% plan. So I'd like to suggest that we ask Zoe to just give us 2 options on the 10% based on some tinkering with that. The 3rd option that you gave us was more than 90 units on Randolph Ave, but try going to 3 units on the Elliott Street corridor. So to balance those 2 out.
Well, I think she already did that, and it doesn't balance, right?
I think they're working on it right
195.
now. I think they're working on it right now.
Yeah, so
Oh.
we have what I've done is here I can confirm that without making any alterations for Elliott Street, you can go down to 90 units for 7-Eleven Randolph Ave, and you're still clear of the metrics.
Yes, so I guess the question was, if you go 3 on those, what would you have to be at Randolph Ave?
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So
It's
one that
just a question what that would be.
prioritizes.
Yeah.
Yeah, one that prioritizes getting to 3 units for tier 2 and 3, as well as 1 for Elliott Street corridor, and then plugs in Randolph Ave at whatever it needs to be to make up the balance of that change, and then one that prioritizes keeping 7-Eleven Randolph at 90 and leaves Elliott Street corridor as it is.
Yeah. So if you could have JT or Matthew do that while you present the 25%.
I'd like to stay here. I'm not ready to leave this yet. Please,
Yeah.
Cheryl, if we could. Zoe, to accomplish what Cheryl has mentioned there, tier 2 and tier 3 go into 3 units. Is there another parcel that we could add into this? That and granted, we're considering an exception here on Granite Ave North as 3.8 acres. What if we were to seek another exception to allow us to have some flexibility?
So I think that's where you get into the, I think at this point, adding more acreage isn't particularly helpful to you.
So I think what comes to mind for me is Unkety House. What is, does anybody recall the acreage of the Unkety House land parcel?
That's in there.
Where is the Unkety House in this? Can we see it on the map?
It's under 5 acres, Sean, because we had to add in a few adjacent parcels to get to that minimum 5 acre.
Can you bring up the map again, Zoe, and drop your cursor on the Unkety House?
It's within the Blue Hills corridor.
Well, I think it's Mattapan's.
Or is it Mattapan? Oh, I'm sorry. It is Mattapan Station, sorry.
It's Mattapan Station, okay.
So
it's here, is that right?
Yep, that would be it. So is that in that spreadsheet that you were just on?
Yeah, so it would be, let me put a slideshow. So Mattapan Station here This is set from our prior work. So this is embedded in the rapid transit scenario as well, at 45 units per acre, an FAR of 1.1. And then we've set a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size as a way of protecting the existing single family home,
Okay.
other, small parcel patterns that exist along, lining that property.
Okay. And we're generating 183 units there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the paper mill site?
So that one is, as we have in kind of our intro slides, is below that 5 acres. Again, it is a very unique site. I think it would, I think the way to, if you were to use that in this context, I would use it in lieu of 711 Randolph Ave, and zone it at a similar density. Adding it will mean that you'll end up with more units, like in excess of your the target that we're looking at here.
Okay.
Because it just adds the overall acreage, which means you kind of need to keep everything at that 15 units per acre average. You end up with more units than.
Might it allow us to reduce to 3 on tier 2 and tier 3 on Elliott Street?
If it was zoned at a very high density, it could enable that.
What's a high density?
So like, for instance, Granite Ave North is the real, in this suite, that's what's really enabling you to have this many districts that are at a lower density, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at this, right, there are 2, Mattapan Station and Granite Ave North are both above 15 units per acre, and all of the other sub-districts are below 15 units per acre. So they're the anchor that's like keeping you over 15.
So were you suggesting the paper mill site would be somewhere, in that range of units per acre, similar to the Granite Ave North or the Mattapan Station?
I'd have to do it to give you a more honed sense of it. I'd have to do it through the compliance model, but yes, I do think it would have to be, it would have to come in probably higher than 711 Randolph Ave is, because it's a smaller acreage. So it's weighted average impact on the overall will be smaller. So it needs to be denser to play a similar role.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But maybe it alleviates some of the tear down concern on Elliott Street is that reasonable? That we might be able to take tier 2 and tier 3 down to 3 instead of 4?
Sounds like maybe this could be a third scenario that swaps the paper mill site as a standalone site. Again, we haven't asked that question of the state, but I think there's an argument there similar to the argument that's made for Granite Ave North, although it's more contingent, I would say, because it does have parcels adjacent to it. But I think the version of that would make sense to test would be a version where it swaps in for 711 Randolph Ave. Does that?
Yeah.
No.
I would be interested in seeing that. Yeah.
So I would keep 711 because
I don't see that.
It's already there. We need to get credit for it. But I do think looking at the paper mill site, which is about 4 acres, and 2 Granite Ave is about 4 acres. So I would think doing a scenario that Granite Ave North and Truman Parkway paper mill site is somewhat similar. And they're on either side of the town. They sort of bookend the town, the east side and the west side. So I would think keeping 711 in and adding the paper mill might alleviate some of the Blue Hill Parkway or Elliott Street tier 3.
And then bump up 711 to like 125 or 130 units. Pushes us over the 15 unit per acre model density.
I don't know if I'll go that high there.
Well, I mean, I think at that number, the developer isn't going to go alter his plans and build them. I think at 190, he would.
But just be careful about that.
And is that something, Zoe, you could do tonight? Look at, or Matt, put in the 3 for tier 2 and tier 3 Elliott?
You would need additional 25 units in order to hit the minimum 985. If you were to reduce Elliott Street corridor, all tiers reduced to max 3 units per acre.
So we would need 115
Sorry.
at 7-Eleven Randolph Ave, or
115.
okay.
150.
Done.
We could do 115 at the paper mill.
Or just 15 more at 7-Eleven Randolph. I'm sorry, 25 more.
But we also are looking for planning for the future. I know we have MBTA in front of us, but we also know that there's going to be development, and because that's just the nature of planning. So why not plan for something?
Well, as I suggested before, if you think that there's going to be other development on Randolph Ave, you can expand the 7-Eleven district. But I will point out also that the paper mill site does have brownfield zoning over it. And I do believe we said that was 90 units. I'd have to go back and look that up. But to your point, Maggie, I'd rather see that as an opportunity, because we already saw it as an opportunity when we zoned for it long ago. And if it needs more than 90 to become feasible from an infrastructure point of view, it is I think a good alternative if it can be made to be acceptable at HLC. We did put that site in our comment letter, Zoe, as well as the 2 Granite Ave or Granite Ave North, as something that we would like to have them consider as a smaller sub-district.
So would you mind going back to the map and just dropping the cursor for everyone's familiarity with where that location actually is, the paper mill site?
Yeah. So it is right here at the town border with Boston, close to the commuter rail stop. It's only access to that commuter rail stop would be under the rail right of way here, and then via sort of, Milton sort of street roads, at grade streets, et cetera, to get around to the station there. But you can see it's just outside of that half-mile radius for the station.
One of the reasons, Zoe, that I feel strongly about these parcels that are within the commuter rail station, my opinion is that they present a really good development opportunity. Access into the city using the commuter rail is the preferred way if you happen to live in this community. It's a very, very reliable form of train transportation, which we don't necessarily have with the Red Line and the trolley. So, if we were to, and the reason I say that, if we're to ask for relief on the minimum acreage, I think the argument we could present to HLC is the viability of development over there is very, very good for the reason of the proximity it has to the commuter rail station.
Yeah, I think that's valid as long as you zone it to be dense enough to pay for the infrastructure, because the paper mill site has such a constrained access.
I
completely appreciate the logic.
I totally understand that. I mean, we got to give a developer an opportunity to make a deal that works. So I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a solid foundation for a discussion with HLC. That is something that would be developed.
JT, can you do me a quick favor there? When you just ran it with the 3 units for tiers 2 and 3, what was the number of units that came back for tier 2 and tier 3 with that modeling?
Yeah, it is. So tier 2 drops to 69, and tier 3 drops to 30.
Okay. So if you were to, again, this is all I'll have to double check my math later, but if you were to, for instance, put the paper mill site at 90 just on its own. And maybe JT, can you check for me if the density denominator, as I can see right here. So what's the density denominator deduction for the paper mill site? Do you
That's
have
it. That's it right there. It's 10 acres.
Right, but it's plus sorry, now you're really getting the behind the scenes, but this is why these iterations take some time.
Do we have to use the all 10 acres? Do we have to use that 6.86?
So that's
beautiful.
That's what I'm thinking is
Because I thought we only were
yes,
we
so
were
we're
allowed to
talking
do
about correct. Just that one site, but to figure out the density denominator, we have to do some quick calculations for that. So
yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, JT, all of the density denominator deduction is coming out of the paper mill site. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. If you go back to the maps that compare them all to scale, you'll see the density denominator deduction layer on top.
Right. And remove the 6.86 from the map.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a 0.97 reduction. So if you were to zone, let me go back to a way that makes sense to look at this. If we were to look at, as a starting point, adding the paper mill site to this as a base and dropping dropping these to 3, as JT just described, these dropped to 69 and 30. Those are no longer correct. If we add in the paper mill site at 90 units just to start for alignment with what it is already, that tallies to, these are no longer correct. That gets you to 15.6 here and 1,051. So you can start to see that sort of, if you add it in, you start climbing above the unit count there. But it's one way to think of it. It does give you, you're still above the density, so you could, in theory, keep finding some places to shave things down a little bit. You could increase the paper mill site above 90 to give a little bit more room for that to really be more viable as a development site. But that's kind of the interrelationships that we'd be dealing with in this scenario.
Well, I to my fellow board members, I like the integration of the paper mill site to afford the benefit that we are, creating on Elliott Street. It's that I think that's a good change and
worth doing.
And I think, Cheryl, it provides some protection against the tear down that you're concerned with.
Yeah, so was this meant to be in combination or including keeping 711 Randolph Ave in?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. 711 stays in, the paper mill site gets added, and tier 2 and tier 3 get modified to 3.
Yeah, I like it because I like the opportunity at the paper mill site would actually be able to produce units of a scale that we could get affordable units from it.
Yeah. That's another good point. Yeah.
711, honestly, I don't really see the advantage of it in a 10% plan where it's already has the units there. Mattapan Station already has units too, but we think that there's actually capacity to add some units there. And Grand Ave North, we've already talked about why that made sense. So the 711 Randolph Ave it just seems like if we were going to consider, like Maggie has said a couple of times, that there might be property and play on Randolph Ave, why wouldn't we zone that property instead of 7-Eleven Randolph Ave and still keep the paper mill and everything else that we've got here?
Well, I'd rather see an increase in the paper mill site, and then possibly, to Cheryl's point, a decrease in the Blue Hills Parkway. I mean, Unquity House now currently has 139 units. So, and then I think they have room to build another. I mean, so I don't know if we're concerned about Blue Hill Parkway. I'm not so concerned about the Unquity House parcel. It's more outside the Unquity House parcel I'm a little concerned about.
That's in Mattapan Station.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sorry, yeah.
So Zoe, when I was 6,000 square feet, this used to be 7,500 square feet, minimum lot size for Blue Hills Parkway, right? Because when I looked at that back when, there were not very many parcels that qualified. Do you know how many parcels now qualify at 6,000 square feet that are providing that 235 unit capacity?
That's a good
So we might want to
question.
reduce that. Yeah.
JT, can you go back to our latest rapid transit compliance spreadsheet and see how many parcels are actually contributing? There was a point in time when we studied a expanded Blue Hills district that went beyond the Blue Hill Parkway and included more of the residential small lot area to the west. That was there were a lot of very small parcels in that part of town. And so that's part of why we pulled back from looking at that area, because it wasn't really compatible with putting 3 units on those parcels and retaining open space. But the Blue Hills Parkway, the parcels that face Blue Hills Parkway corridor are a little larger. They have also more generous setbacks. So that's part of why that is one of the few districts that has a higher open space requirement, because we're trying to maintain that pattern of a very large front setback from the kind of boulevard format. So I think that it was doing decently well in terms of the number of parcels that were contributing with that contracted footprint. It was just really not working out well when we had that larger footprint that included a lot of the small lots.
Well, the one thing about the Blue Hills Parkway corridor is it's close to not only the trolley, but also to the commuter rail.
Yeah.
And it's 20 minutes to South Station from that stop on the Fairmount line at a subway fare. So to Sean's point earlier, it is an attractive alternative. And so it is a good place in terms of access to transit to have the district. So this is providing for 235. What do you remember what it was providing for before?
I can jump back and see. We had in the 2023 warrant, we had it at 0.7 FAR, 7,500 square foot minimum lot size, and that was giving us 175 units.
And now we're at
6,000.
And now we're at
235. Okay.
So that had a really big impact in terms of the density for Blue Hills Parkway.
Okay.
So we could probably dial that down a little bit, or dial it up the lot size. Because we went to a 7,000 square foot lot.
If you include 7-Eleven, I bet you could.
Or 7,500 square foot lot for the Blue Hills Parkway.
I think I would suggest to whatever change we're making to Blue Hills Parkway corridor to have a parallel change in Elliott Street, because they're so closely tied in terms of the pattern. But I think that, that is one of, in terms of, managing this, these numbers here, I think that would be a reasonable way of fine tuning these districts based on the density boost that you're getting from 7-Eleven and paper mill.
Yeah, because Blue Hills Parkway is, the gateway into the town, into the Blue Hills, it's a way through a park. So I would like to see if we're able to decrease that.
But this area that the zone is in, Maggie's already built up. It's not the undeveloped parcels. You go back and look at the map.
Yeah.
Let's go here. I'll also pull in a second. I'll pull in one of the zoom in ones that we had done, just so you can see a little
that's
bit
great.
more closely what that is. 1 second. This is like a grafting from all of the different iterations. 1 second.
Or maybe
That has Milton yoga.
Yeah, could we reduce some of them on the left-hand side of the map? Reduce some of the parcels?
So for reference, this is these are this is a little bit out of date, but
The gas station.
These are the districts that are sort of the parcels that are generally speaking included in the Blue Hills Parkway corridor.
But one thing I would say that I remember looking at the food mart and the auto repair place, those were too small to be included or to take advantage of the zoning. And I'm not sure about the vacant parcel next to the food mart building. So if that I'm talking about is at the intersection of Brook Road and Thatcher,
right,
and the Parkway, just to your right there. There you go.
Yeah.
So we would like to capture those, I think, Maggie, though, so I think looking at the lot size, in thinking about those is good. And then next to those, there's already 3 families. Those 3 sort of south of that intersection, those 3 parcels, I think are already 3 families. Yes, right there.
One's a 4.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jim. 1 to 4.
Yeah, and I lived on West Street, so I'm very familiar with West Street. And to Jim's point about parking, it was a 2-family, and there were 3 of us in our apartment and a married couple upstairs, and there was 5 cars. And we had an L-shaped driveway.
Yeah.
And there were 5 cars that we were shuffling around. So parking is tight down there.
So you can look at that relative to, which parcels drop off at those thresholds. Is it worth it to do that? Is it giving you something valuable or not really?
Right.
Okay, but I think in the interest of time, I'm inclined to move along to the rapid transit pieces. Are there any other things you want to address or follow-ups you want to give us on the adjacent community scenarios that we've run?
Just not to beat a dead horse, but when you do some of this, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to adding those 25 units back into 7-Eleven.
If we need to, yeah.
If we need them, it's just sort of, that parcel is already being built. The impact is already being felt. No matter what we do, we're going to have the impact. Milton will have the impact of 7-Eleven Randolph. And I just think if you go up a little bit and bump that density up to over 15, it's never going to be realized. That's
Yeah,
me.
why don't we'll start with the refinements that were discussed for the Elliott Street and Blue Hills Parkway corridors and see what kind of gap that creates, and then look to the paper mill site and 7-Eleven Randolph to make up for that gap.
And Zoe, if you could when you get those done, if you could send those to Cheyenne to just distribute so we can sort of be processing it before the next meeting, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem.
Zoe, one question before you leave this and we move on. Are you also able to generate for us the net new number that each of these plans would result in?
So we did look into a method that would enable us to calculate that. It is more complicated than it sounds because of the specifics of, we've now secured like the data that we need to be able to do that in terms of the town's data on number of units that exist on a given parcel and what type of units they are, as in single family or multifamily. We can do it, but we can't, in terms of just like time and capacity, we can't do it for many iterations. And I also think it's the intuitive takeaways, right? Like you can kind of, these places well enough that you probably already know the takeaway of that analysis. We can do it to confirm those takeaways, but I think in the time that we have, It's something that might make sense to, do more as like a follow-on, from, as we're working through the refinements here, we can look into that as like something that we do, let's say in May, when the warrant's gone out and we're trying to help you message what that means for people.
For me, there's obviously, I think we all understand that the net new on the paper mill site is 90. If we were to, follow the model on the screen, and it's 171 on Granite Ave North. For me, the net new is a really important number for us as a town, because what I have a significant concern for is our ability to provide services to all of the residents that we would ultimately have in town if the units are built. So the net new is a really important number for us. And, what I believe is the ultimate result for the town of Milton, if 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units are built, it allows residents that live in homes that are 3- and 4-bedroom homes whose children have been raised to leave their homes, stay in town, move into one of those units, and a family buys the house that they moved out of, and the result is that we now have children that likely would be responsible for putting into the school system, right? So you wouldn't have been a part of this, but back last year, the calculation, if we were to add 2,461 new units, was that we were going to add, I believe the number was 275 children to the school system. I never believed that for 3 seconds. It just doesn't make any sense to me, because there was never a calculation for the empty nester transition, right? For the person that sold their house. Me, for example, I have 4 children. We have 4 children. My children are no longer at school age. So if our house was to be sold, a family moves in here and I move into one of these units over on the paper mill site, likely there's 3 or 4 children, 3 or 4 children that potentially coming into the school system. The net new is important for us as a town. It should be important for everybody, because we're struggling as it is right now with the number of children that we have in our school system, and this is going to contribute. And we also have fire service, police service, and many services that we are obligated to provide to everybody that lives in the town. It's for that reason that I think the net new is a really important number for us. But I understand the limitations in terms of time, what you can calculate, what you have time to calculate, what you don't have time to calculate. But I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, because net new ultimately is an important data point for us.
Yeah, understood. I think the piece of it that makes me a little nervous in terms of how it's being used is that it's in terms of when you start to calculate, the impacts on services, right? That's a predictive exercise that involves making a lot of assumptions about who's moving into the units, what size the units are, how many bedrooms are in the units. All of the information that we're putting together is neutral on all of those pieces.
I understand. No, I understand.
And so
I'm sorry to interrupt, as was RLC's. RLC, when they did it, said they couldn't calculate how many people would move out of their home, their 2, 3, or 4-bedroom home, into one of these units. So they calculated zero children. So the 275 was the calculation of the children that would be that would be added to our number of students to educate. But that would be only those that occupied the new units that were developed, right? They didn't calculate anything for what I have just described, the empty nester selling their home and moving in, which is the driver of all, because many of the units that will be built will be 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom. They're not going to, there'll be a really small amount of 3-bedroom in all of this zoning. It just won't be. I think that's the ultimate result. And that was ultimately part of RLC's calculation, to be very few 3-bedrooms. So there won't be many families that occupy the units that are being built. The impact will be, as I said, when someone sells their home in town, moves into one of those units, and a new family moves into town to occupy the house that they moved out of.
So yeah, I would like Sean, to table that discussion if you may, and so we can see the progress on the 25%.
Great. Thank you. Good point, Sean. And yeah, I think this is terrific. And I think we've made a lot of progress tonight on this. Okay, let's look at the next
slides here. So for the rapid transit community scenarios, there are really two main moves that we were looking at. So we've done a lot of work together in refining the parameters for certain districts, getting them to kind of all balance out in ways that were felt good. The two pieces of kind of information or suggestions that we're kind of integrating right now. The first is relative to looking at a scenario that did not include East Milton Square. So we know, everyone knows there's, an ongoing zoning effort that the town is already pursuing for that district, that, if I'm remembering correctly, allows for a special permit pathway that, based on requiring ground floor commercial at 3 stories, if I'm remembering correctly. That's where it's landed right now. And so has been some concern about the interaction of this zoning with that new zoning. So we looked at some scenarios where we remove the East Milton Square district and substitute other candidate sub-districts in for East Milton Square. The other thing that we also looked at, based on our most recent coordination with the state on the issue of Granite Ave South, and my apologies, this is a little out of date. This portion of Granite Ave South is removed based on our more recent analysis and decisions with the planning board. So we looked at, if we do not get the what the town would need from the DOT to consider that developable land, that drops out as well. So we need to think about how we make up for that in the overall picture. So we've taken those kind of sequentially. So the first, just for comparison, as a reminder, this is where we were in 2023. We can come back to this if we need to kind of understand where there are differences and where we've made changes. This is where we left off kind of towards the end of 2024. We had just refined the metrics within that existing set of districts. The yellow and red are highlighting where there are impacts based on those revisions that we had made from the 2023 article. This is kind of the base that we were working with going into the revisions for today. And as a reminder, this was the shift. A lot of the focus of our prior work was looking at how can we sort of rebalance between East Milton and the Elliott Street corridor and the kind of the rest of the districts, given that East Milton had a lot of units under the 2023 sort of approach. So this just summarizes that shift. That's kind of the base shift that we're comparing to. And, as a reminder, this is kind of, where they're all clustered there. And we're looking at sort of swapping in these candidate sub-districts that we've kind of already referred to a little bit in our conversation thus far, to play similar roles in the overall approach. And just as a reminder, the acres that we're listing here are the density denominator acres. So that's, when you remove, that's developable square feet for each of these. So removing like wetlands and things like that. So the first, sorry, before I move on. So this is just a zooming in, this is to scale. So you can kind of see the relative sizes of each of these districts. And the sort of pink overlay is the density denominator reduction. So those are the areas where there's wetlands or other kind of constraints that make it not developable. And I've added some caveats here that are just kind of notes to understand relative to, the viability of development moving forward for each of these, and some kind of, ongoing concerns that we'll kind of manage as we get closer to the finish line for, whether any of these would be considered spot zoning as we kind of get to the sort of the finer points of the zoning. Any questions on any of those before I go further?
I mean, I'm still against Randolph Ave too, just to put it out there.
Yeah, we've heard some feedback to that effect as well. So I've kind of noted it here that there's some concerns about that outside of more literal like developability concerns and zoning concerns, just concerns about whether it's the right property to include for this. Okay,
East Milton Square, yeah, it was also, East Milton Square was a concern because we're doing the overlay zoning right now, and
yeah,
it's in a great place, so bringing in more density might be a problem.
Yeah, I know that the interaction of those two zoning frameworks is something that the planning board has been tracking as we've been working on this.
Yeah, I'm with my planning board members that both of those would be out in my book.
I'll just make note of that.
Both of what would be out in your book, Jim?
Oh, the hillside, well, the old Pepsi plant and East Milton Square.
We're going to need something to replace East Milton Square and Granite Ave South. So it seems to me we need to run through the options and see what they mean and see what they look like before we exclude things.
Okay.
So this is that first set. So this is again in response to the potential that Granite Ave South is no longer developable. So looking at if we swapped in one of these, what would the impact be? And so for all of these, we wanted to start with a base of assuming a 40% minimum open space percentage, because that's what we've been using for the majority of our districts as a way of making sure that we're preserving open space that is valued in the community. And then also we started at 2.5 stories for all of these because we know that they're in residential contexts and that a more bulky building might not be well received in those neighborhoods. So that is, we've held constant for all of them. What you'll see is, fluctuates across the different districts is the max units per acre and the FAR. That's how we're managing, prioritizing the open space percentage and the building bulk in terms of the number of stories, is we're allowing the FAR and the units per acre to fluctuate sort of along with the size of those parcels and what the role that they're playing. So what I want to kind of focus your attention on is the townwide and East Milton change. So this is in the 2024 base that we had worked on together for a couple months last year. This shows that the net change that we're seeing townwide relative to the 2023 warrant. So townwide, that was 52 units less than what went forward for the 2023 warrant, and 445 units less on the east side of town. For all of these, obviously, since we're removing Granite Ave South, which is on the east side of town, you'll see that same drop across all of these, which is reflecting the loss of Granite Ave South. What's different for each of the swaps is the impact on the townwide unit capacity. So some of them, like Brushwood, results in an increase in the number of units townwide because of the relationship of like size and density and things like that. Whereas like St. Pius and 711 Randolph, because they're smaller in size, they have a more dramatic reduction in townwide units. So you can kind of like play it by the numbers there if you're kind of thinking about this relative to townwide units and East Milton units. You can also focus in on like the characteristics for the districts themselves. So, thinking about the densities that you want to see for those districts, they're all, in order to serve this role, Granite Ave South was one of our more dense districts. So these are all kind of 20s to 30s in terms of density, which is roughly analogous with also what East Milton Square we've been sort of penciling in at roughly that level of density. Granite Ave South was at that level of density roughly. You can see right there. So
a question here, if I may. The Truman Parkway, does that include across both sides of Truman Parkway?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Any reactions to this set?
So if I understand correctly, to get the greatest benefit, it's those minus 79s. Is that right? So in terms of getting us closer to the required 2461? So St. Pius and 711 Randolph Ave do more for us that way?
Yep,
Okay.
they get you closest to your targets without having many additional units beyond them.
And Brushwood adds a lot, so that seems to be one that we probably can all agree should be eliminated.
Yeah, however, I think 195 at St. Pius is a little excessive. And at least with Brushwood, that is all, like a condo association.
By the way, we're talking, someone messaged me, we're talking about 333 Brush Hill Road, right? In terms of the Brushwood.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And those are condos too.
Right here.
So I'm not happy with the 195 at St. Pius. And if you did 15 units per acre and it's 6.3 acres, I mean, that is at 94.5 units or 95 units, and even 95 units, I think, is too many. Because how many units is at Woodmere up there? Do you know?
Only like 34
In
units.
the 40s. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I thought it was like 34 units. It's
Yeah, so I would think any development at St. Pius would have to be in keeping with what Woodmere is.
I'd like to just point out here, folks, that that third option that was discussed earlier, it's this 15.1 is basically the 15 units an acre. So it's generating these kind of densities that folks were talking about. So the 563 units would be at these kind of densities on parcels in that half mile of the commuter rail. I think we
Why
need
don't
to be
we let
careful
Zoe-
about what we
yeah.
wish for.
let's let Zoe go through all of the scenarios and then we can maybe then
Circle back to them.
circle back.
This is a clarification because I realize there's a lot on this slide, but just to walk you through, right? So this is all the inputs basically. So the sub-district parameters and the acreage. This is for the individual sub-district that we're talking about, like what is the unit capacity that we're putting on that parcel for the purposes of this exercise and the model density. And then this sort of two columns here is when you zoom out to the town as a whole. So for instance, for St. Pius, to serve this role as swapping in for Granite Ave South, it would need to be at 195 units and 30.9 units per acre. And that would mean townwide, you'd have 2,507 units and 15.1 model density. We can dial things down a little bit to get closer to that 15 units per acre for these if there's one that's standing out as having, being of interest. But just so that the sea of numbers starts to have some some structure for you all.
So then, Zoe, for the townwide, then the Elliott Street corridor is at the 6,000 minimum lot size and allowing for 4 units on lots, 10,000 square feet and above, right?
Yeah, so it basically holds these numbers constant, and then all we're doing is swapping in for specific districts. So for all of these like scenarios that we're running for these other ones, we're holding everything else constant. So we're only messing with Granite Ave South and East Milton Square, and we're holding everything else as it was when we left off at the end of 2024.
Okay. Thanks.
So basically a 1-for-1 swap. We're not tweaking these individually yet.
Yeah, not yet. Because the permutation combination, actually, I'll show you at the end, it starts to become unwieldy. So I think there's some decisions we can make tonight, and then we can go one step further in terms of the level of refinement that we do on the preferred ones.
Okay.
So this is the Granite Ave South one. Again, we can return to this to talk about decisions. We did a similar exercise focusing on East Milton Square. This is a little bit of a different game. So like for Granite Ave South, we're really that played a role in terms of density and in terms of number of units. East Milton Square is really playing more of a role in terms of units. It wasn't giving you as much of a density boost. And so that's more the focus of these swaps. So you'll see there's like slightly different numbers that we're penciling in for each of them. Because it's really just getting back the number of units that like you're losing if you lose East Milton Square. So to just kind of quickly walk through here, you can see that again, Brushwood has, in terms of like townwide net change units relative to 2023, it has a lesser reduction than what you're seeing for all the other districts. But you can see that we're penciling it in also at a lower density. So like that's kind of one of the trade-offs. Like it can serve at a lower density in that location, but it means townwide you're having more units than you would in some of the other schemes. So all of that has some trade-offs, right? There's some ways you can modulate that, but for the sake of keeping them constant so you can see them in comparison to one another, we've held a couple things constant for that purpose. Here, I guess it's similar principles across the board. The kind of, I think what I would focus you in on is like the number of units that we're looking at for each of these sub-districts to kind of, again, to play this role and the densities that that implies. So obviously these are, ranging from 14 to 34 roughly units per acre. So it's a pretty big range. And that's really about the interplay between the acreage of each of them and the density denominator and the number of units that we're parking on each of them. The last piece, and then we can go into kind of a more iterative discussion about these different moves. We also looked at a world where Granite Ave South is not eligible and you also want to remove East Milton Square. What combination of other districts would kind of close that gap? And the takeaway here is that you could, you basically, if you pull out Granite Ave South and East Milton, you have two gaps to fill that are related to one another, but they're distinctive. You need 435 units to get back up to your minimum unit target. And you also need to gain 0.6 in density. So you need overall for the districts that you're adding to give you a bit of a density boost. So we looked at all of the sub-district candidate districts that we had been discussing today that we had identified for this analysis, and you could add all of them and meet your compliance numbers. And you could keep across all of those alternative sub-districts, you could keep an average of 8.4 units per acre density across those districts. And the reason that math works, which is a little bit counterintuitive, is that we'd be adding fewer acres than we've removed. So the Granite Ave South and East Milton Square, when we remove those, if we add back all the other ones, we're adding less acreage. And so it changes the whole weighting of all the averages of all the different districts that are included in the overall approach. So this is where it gets a little like wonky math stuff. But what I wanted to basically share back to you is that this really becomes, there's a lot of decisions that have been driven by like numbers and relationships, but this turns back into a like, what is the planning rationale? Because the numbers will work with any combination of these districts. It's really a matter of, do you want fewer districts at a denser, level, more districts at less dense level? Do you want to have specific districts included and others not for other reasons that are independent of those factors? So it's kind of like a take a step back moment and, don't think quite as much about the number machinations and focus instead on like, if we could choose among any of these, which ones would we do and why? So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Zoe. That's great. So you don't have the brownfield site within this?
Not as a standalone. It is embedded in the Truman Parkway one.
Okay. It is included. Okay. That was one question I had.
So Meredith, can I just say, I think, Zoe, the residents would support less density on sites and more districts than less districts with high density. That's the what I think we've heard. And then it becomes a little bit of where the districts are located. But I don't think I've heard anyone say, except for maybe with the exception of Granite Ave North, that this is a great place for higher density.
Well, I think we've said that with the Unquity House site.
Yeah, I think there
And-
are places where higher density works. I think Two Granite Ave, Paper Mill, Extra Space Storage, Dunwoody House.
Well, I'm talking about the new districts that Zoe was speaking to tonight, not the ones that we've already zoned for higher.
You know, one site we haven't talked about, and if we were able to be allowed to consider a less than 5 acre district, is the Ice House. If that could be tied in and add some density
Tell
there.
me where that is.
So that's on Blue Hills Parkway, and it's between Canton Ave. Let me see if I can pull up the address.
It's 3 acres.
It's a 3 acre parcel currently being developed with housing. It's
Is it further south than what?
Further south.
Okay.
Yeah, if you can scroll that down, I don't know.
But to Zoe's question that she posed to us in terms of the options, can you go to your slide again, Zoe? I think she's asking for our feedback about whether we want to include more districts at less density or less districts at higher density. And I offered that I think these districts that we're adding, having them at lesser density. Right. So let's talk about what the higher or lower density numbers are. Because once we start seeing numbers, then maybe that'll help everyone decide how to answer Zoe's question to us.
But should we let her take a look at the Ice House first or no? Wasn't she just looking for the address of the Ice House? Did I miss that?
485 Blue Hills Parkway.
Got it.
As a hypothetical.
It's a good idea, Meredith.
So in a world where you can choose among all of these and you can keep them at relatively low densities, are there ones that you think don't make sense unless they're under a certain number, or don't make sense for other reasons, just as a standalone, that there's like political reasons, or there's building form reasons where you just don't think this is a good fit for this zoning? Is there a way that we can kind of narrow our focus amongst this set of 5?
So the 2 Randolph Avenue properties that we have, the Randolph Ave 2 happens to be owned by the Copeland Foundation, which is a very generous foundation, gifting to the schools and to animal shelters across the board. And they are very concerned about being zoned. So we do have to be very aware of that. But there is the other, and I think it's under 5 acres. And I'm not pushing anything on Randolph Avenue, but we do have another 40B project under construction that maybe we should consider adding in.
I think it was excuse me, that's the one that's next to the other parcel that I think Maggie was referring to, that I referred to earlier. I think you had that. I was looking this up recently, and I think it was in August of 23, that one of the presentations that you had, Zoe. I don't know if you have access to all of your presentations at your fingertips, but
I think it was under the acreage, and I couldn't remember how many units are currently going in there, because
so the 728 Randolph Ave 40B is 40 units on 1 acre. So if
Oh,
there
it's
was
really, it's a really small.
Did you say 48, Maggie, or 40?
40.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to looking at the horse farm.
Which is next to that 40 unit 40B.
I would not,
And it backs up to Bent's and it backs up to, I think, the old dump or maybe even Granite
I would
Lakes.
not put a lot of units on it. The 40 units on 1 acre is very excessive.
Yeah.
The street is 90 units going in. So I'm very concerned. Route 28, I live there,
Yeah.
I walk it. It's one of the most dangerous roads in the state.
One thing I would say, Maggie, is if it's going to get redeveloped as a 40B, as an alternative, this would be a more attractive zoning than a 40B, hopefully.
It will be developed 40B. I just would, I'm cautious. I'm not saying against it.
Yeah.
I'm just cautious, and should not be at the same level of density that we're looking elsewhere. It would have to be the least amount of density possible.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
40 units is an awful lot. But the good thing about that site is that the road is already there and it dumps out into a light.
There you go, you found it.
Yeah, it's still a very high trafficked road. And it's
No,
okay.
sorry, but I think keep going up in your presentation. There. Oh, sorry, go back one slide. There.
Yeah, that guy.
Okay. So the piece at the bottom of there is the where the 40B is going. And then we're talking about what we say the horse farm is that parcel there in the middle. And I believe some of that to the north of that.
Yeah, a triangular shaped one, I think, is also, yeah.
It's also part of the horse farm, right?
Yeah. Because when I owned Bent's, they used to walk through there and have lunch.
But I agree with Maggie. It would have to be a very low density to not overly impact that area.
Meredith, I noticed that Brian Furs has his hand up. I don't know if you want
Oh,
to
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Brian, go ahead, please.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for recognizing me. I know it's not public comment time, but I just wanted to speak as a member of the planning board, former planning board when we were doing the ice house zoning. And sorry, Brian Furs, 630 Brush Hill Road, Milton, Mass. I would just encourage the board to not put in zoning that is not economically viable for a developer, because I think that's what we did with Ice House. At the end of the day, we came up with zoning that everybody thought was great for limiting impact, and as a result, the developers all concluded that they should just bypass zoning and go to 40B. So while I appreciate the concern about impact on 28, and I think it's a very valid concern. I just checked out the new shelter up there yesterday, and it's obviously a really interesting area, but it's a tough road. If you put the lowest density on this property, you will very likely just see a developer come in and use the state zoning through 40B. So I would just put that in the back of your minds, because I do think that is what happened with Ice House. So I just wanted to give you some institutional knowledge there. Thank you.
Great, good comment. Thank you. Okay.
So did you have how many acres this was in that slide deck that you pulled this from?
I unfortunately do not. I'm not
It's
seeing
like
it in that
5.5.
that deck. Maybe JT, could you see if you can pull together an estimate of the parcels there? Let me see if I can get you an address. The lowest of those is 728 Randolph Ave, this bottom one.
Okay, sure.
So this would be a substitute or an alternative to the Randolph Ave 2, where the Copeland property is? Is that what others
Yeah,
are thinking? Okay.
And I will say, my understanding is the owner of this property has passed away, but he was previously speaking to 40B developers. So if we could provide an alternative, which would be attractive, that it would be developed, but not to the level of a 40B, it may be worth us looking at.
So it backs up to the access road, right? So that the 40B is using that as access. So that could be access to a parcel here as well, which is a signalized intersection, which is also something that's safer in terms of some of these Randolph Ave sites, right?
Oh, yeah. That's what I was saying. It dumps right out onto a light. It's perfect. Was that Julia? Did you like that one, Julia? Who was that?
That wasn't me.
All right.
But I wanted to say that the horse farm is zoned for assisted living.
Just so that I'm clear for this, if we look into this as part of the picture, are you still imagining in this configuration, this set of parcels, or just a subset of this set?
Which parcel is that on the upper right? Is that the animal shelter parcel?
Or
Or
is that parkland? Is that parkland? I think that could be under
Owned by JSC Holdings, I believe.
Oh,
what I'm seeing looks like.
Okay, well then, I think all of those parcels could be included, but not at the 40 units an acre density. I agree that that's too much, but that's what the 40B is. But I don't think that's going to get developed into something else as a result of this. But the rest of it, I think, could be included.
We could look at that.
Where is the 40B that's relevant to this one? Is it
that southernmost parcel?
The southernmost one here. Okay.
And that's 728.
So you're imagining including that in this or excluding it because it's already moving forward in some capacity?
I think it depends on the acreage, but it would be good to get I think what some of others were thinking was the unit capacity of it, but it's only as 1 acre if we need it to make the acreage. I think we could include it.
Yeah,
I think it would make sense to include it since it will be developed.
I think we should as well.
And I prefer that to the Copeland site.
And the Copeland,
I think
that's the Randolph Ave 2.
Yes.
Picture we've been using.
Yes. And I think this provides an option, an alternative to a 40B, which is more likely here. So I think it's a good alternative to Randolph Ave 2.
Are there any other of this set that you feel inclined to eliminate at this point?
I'm not 100% on board with that, even though I mentioned it. I'm not, just to let you know.
Yeah.
I'm not 100%.
Yeah, it's
because especially for MBTA, it's I know there's a bus there. It's the 240 bus. It used to run every 30 minutes. Now it runs once an hour. So it's not close to any amenities. So it's not one that I am 100% on board with. Just to let you know. So Zoe, can you explain again, if we included all of these, what density level they would be at? You said you're asking for us to eliminate some, or you're asking us if we should include them all?
I mean, I think it's kind of, it's open, right? So I think we don't need to eliminate any. If you want to, sorry, I'm like getting a little bit lost in my slide deck because now it's a different flow. Okay, this is where I want it to be. So we ran, with this set of districts that we have, on the slides prior to this one that we were just talking about, the horse farm and not including like the paper mill site as a standalone. It's just included as part of the Truman Parkway grouping that we had put together. If you used all 5 of those, you would get, and you lost Granite Ave South and East Milton Square, you could get to the 2,461 unit target, and 15.2 units per acre.
Hey, Zoe.
Yeah.
I need to correct myself on this actually, because I'm just realizing that I included the mandatory mixed use numbers in calculating that density.
Okay, gotcha.
And so that just means broad strokes that it would be less than that you wouldn't be able to fit all 5. Maybe without really jacking up the units in order to hit minimum density.
Okay. Do you think you can run the numbers now to see what that comes to with that the mandatory mixed use adjustment?
Yes.
So one thing,
yeah,
just in terms of decision making, Zoe, I think the paper mill, if we could run that just as standalone without the parcels across, would be another thing. And then can you go back to the listing of which showed the unit?
This.
Right. So if we removed, do we need 2 higher density ones like the St. Pius and 711 Randolph Ave? Do we need 2 at that 34-ish model density? Or can one of those go?
So this set, I'm realizing, JT, are these ones also affected by that calculation issue with the mandatory mixed use?
So these numbers, let me see. Let me confirm. Give me 2 minutes, but yeah.
So I think, big picture here for what we were looking at for this, like on this slide, was swapping out individual districts. So we weren't looking at combinations of them. So it's possible that you could do a combination. It would just have different impacts. It's like 5 factorial, like 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 to that would be the number of combinations that we're doing to answer all those questions.
To the point that you had before, 333 Brush Hill Road seems, can you go back to the map of that? I'm just trying to think about which sites seem to make.
But that seems high on Brushwood for
and it's not, and how far is it from the transit circle? Is that the circle right there?
Okay. Right here.
Yeah. So
and St. Pius seems high.
Yeah, so I guess, right. I'm intrigued by the sort of spreading it out idea that we talked about and sort of keeping some of these, but not necessarily at those densities. That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
Like if we keep them all, what are the densities that we keep them at?
Maybe it would be helpful to kind of do it in reverse in that, like for each of these districts, like what's the number of units that I'm not saying we're going to use all of those, but what's the maximum number of units that you feel is passable for each of these sites, given their location, their proximity to things, their context, and then that can help us say, okay, can it plug? Is there a way that this district can plug into the overall picture that holds to that standard? And if not, then it's not a good fit. Versus trying to do it the reverse way, which is there's so many combinations that it's difficult for us to give you like actually really what would be helpful to inform the decision. So I think it might be easier to do it in reverse.
So this is 18 acres.
Yeah, so that's like kind of how my brain has been thinking. Like we know what we as a town are accepting of. As I said before, we accept 88 Wharf. We accept that they have however many units they have. And so that's why in my brain, I was looking at Woodmere, which is right up by St. Pius. And so I think the neighborhood, if you were a neighbor up there, what would you be willing to see? So I think everybody wants to do something, but as long as they can visually understand it, and if they look at what's already in their neighborhood or what's there, then it's not as scary for them.
So you said we need 435 units, right? So
yeah, total across the however many districts we put together, we need to at least get to for the East Milton Square. Let me step back. So in a world where we are not using Granite Ave South, we are not using East Milton Square.
Right.
In that scenario, our gap is 435 units and we need a density boost of 0.6.
So can you go to the list of districts again? I think we all agree that 711 Randolph Ave, maybe going to maybe 115 units there. So if that then would drop us to needing 320 units, right? And then if we said we were all comfortable with at least 90 at the paper mill site, then that would bring us to
but maybe
230, right?
I'd be comfortable with more, I think, there, because if 2 Granite Ave has 173, wouldn't we be comfortable 173 at paper mill?
That's, I don't know, you know, what if that's like a 6-story building maybe there, the 2 Granite Ave is a little different, but I mean, I hear you about going more than 90, but I'm just trying to do a little bit, let's say it's 115 again. So if we did, or just call it 120, that would get us down to 200, needing 200. And if we did 200 spread between, let's just call it
90 on Brushwood.
Well, so I'm thinking 728 Randolph Ave is also a one that we should.
Oh yeah, 728. That would be preferable.
Were you able to determine how many acres that is? Someone from your team, Zoe?
I think JT is now doing the calculation reconciliation. Let me see if I can get the area. Okay, I have the 728 Randolph is. I think I have the square footage here. Let me just do a quick tally. Leverage having more than one person, you know.
Yeah, nice.
Okay, so you want just for that. Go to.
Well, we already know that's 40 units going there. And that's 1 acre. So the rest of that could be
6.342 acres for this one here.
6 point. Sorry, I'm sorry. 6 point.
About 6.3-ish acres. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
For everything shown, JT?
Yeah, including the right of way in between the two.
And that bottom parcel that kind of looks like a key.
Yeah.
Yes, it's probably about 5.5 or 5 acres.
So if you did that at 15 units an acre, I don't know if that's the right number or not, but just for numbers, that's 95.
Yeah.
And there's already 40. So I think at 95, that might be a 40B still, given that there's 40 on that one below. So it might want to be more. So let's just say you did 120 there. Again, I'm just doing numbers. That would leave 80 for either 333 Brush Hill Road or combine that with St. Pius. I'm not sure. Can you go back to that list?
So I guess the question are, so we've gone through 7-Eleven Randolph. We're assuming Randolph Ave 2, aka the Copeland site is not one of the ones that we're looking at further. That would mean that we've gotten sort of penciled in some numbers for 7-Eleven Randolph, for the Randolph Ave and Access Road pairing, and for the paper
Truman
mill site
Parkway,
as a
right.
standalone. It sounds like also you'd be more interested in the paper mill site as a standalone than pairing it with the parcels that are adjacent to it.
Yeah,
Am
I think
that correctly?
yes,
Right.
not the full 10 acres. Right.
So, and how many units? Well, if we
Rushwood, I
did,
think, has 17 condo units on it currently for frame of reference. So that's about roughly a condo an acre.
Can't see how that 17.9 acres isn't dragging down the density denominator. Right? That's a
So the thing to keep in mind is it's swapping in for these two. So, I don't think Brushwood is a big asset in terms of what it offers for like density gains, given the context it is in, but it is closer to the commuter rail station. So there is an argument for, greater density in that location based on proximity, but it is a condo parcel, and therefore it is very unlikely that it will ever get redeveloped. So that's a factor that goes in both directions depending on what you're looking to accomplish.
so the St. Pius includes there's a vacant parcel as well as the house of worship parcel, right? So that vacant parcel, if I'm not sure if it's 3 acres, but in any case, it seems to me that's a good one to include as well, since it's just outside the half-mile circle as well. So to split that remaining 80 units between those two parcels or those two sub-districts.
Is there a connecting parcel to Brushwood that would get us into the half mile? So then we would be statute compliant?
So I think the sub-district itself still wouldn't be, even if you had a parcel that connected to this is like a little bit like speculation territory, right? Because the statute itself isn't very doesn't get into these finer points. But I think if you were to go very strictly with what the statute is included, that it speaks about within the 0.5 mile radius. So I don't think there's a world where I don't think any of these could contribute towards a statute plan, if we're going to be very by the book about what's included in that.
Okay.
So what if we said 30 units at St. Pius and 50 units at Brushwood?
Yeah, we can run that those numbers and then see, the other variable is density, right? So that what you just walked through, Cheryl, right? That gets us through the unit piece, and then there's a certain amount that goes beyond that to also address the density, and that's affected by a bunch of different factors. So we can take what you just kind of walked us through if the other planning board members feel like that's broadly speaking the right order of magnitude density sort of spectrum across these different sites, we can use that as a guidepost to think about how to combine these and finesse the density questions associated with that.
So Zoe, so again, maybe for people who weren't here at the very beginning, can you explain again the why Granite Ave South really pretty much needs to come out now? And the reason
So it's really
for
just
that.
an insurance at this point, as in, we don't yet have in writing that the DOT has an intent to dispose of that property. So since your housing production plan has expired, the only other way that you can override public land being excluded is if the owner of that land has made a very clear indication of their intent to dispose of the land for housing. And so you would, in order now, given that the housing production plan has expired, you would need DOT to provide that kind of documentation that was convincing enough that UHLC is willing to accept it as developable land for multifamily housing in the future. So it's really, we want to, because we have so little time and we haven't yet gotten that documentation in place, we want to make sure that we're preparing a backup plan if Granite Ave South falls through.
Does it help that maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that parcel was going to be swapped in some kind of a land deal? So this DOT was close to agreeing to swap it out for another parcel?
It probably helps your case, but I don't think it would be sufficient in the current climate. I think they'd need to see a commitment from DOT. I don't want to speak for UHLC, but I don't think that would be sufficient from what I understand so far.
So one of the things, so I think that would be helpful, again, because we have people tonight's meeting who haven't been at other meetings, at least by the numbers, to run through where we are in the Elliott Street corridor, just how we adjusted it from the 2023.
Do that. Let me go to. Okay, so this is where we were at the end of 2023 with the warrant that went to town meeting and then was repealed based on the voter referendum. This version had, if you focus in on the Elliott Street corridor rows here, the tiers 1, 2, and 3, they're all part of the same, they're a single geography, but it's divvied up by the parcel size. So that there are unique rules based on your parcel size. So in 2023, Tier 1 started at 7,500 square feet as a minimum lot size, and allowed you up to 3 units and 0.7 FAR. Same thing for these ones. We have not changed the parcel size thresholds here, but we did change the FAR for all 3. We changed for tiers 2 and 3, we changed from 3 units per lot to 4 units per lot because we did some testing and that was fit comfortably within the kind of pattern of the neighborhood, the levels of open space, et cetera. And we brought the minimum lot size for tier 1 down to that 6,000 square foot lot. So this is that modified set of metrics that you see here. We also modified Blue Hills Parkway to align with those metrics so that they're moving in lockstep with one another for the tier 1 of Elliott Street and the Blue Hills Parkway corridor as its own standalone. So you can see those changes here highlighted in yellow. So it changed from 0.7 to 0.5 FAR here, 0.52 for tier 2. To 0.4. So you can see we basically just tightened up the FAR for all of them. So it was very closely aligning with the way that the model calculates units. So we weren't losing unit capacity, but we were having tighter controls on the way that people can build in the Elliott Street corridor.
So may I just jump in there on the FAR? It's just that's the building size, right? Just for people who may not be familiar with the language, the shortcuts. Yeah. Okay.
You can think of it as like the bulk of the building. So regardless of the number of units that are in there, how big can the building get in terms of the amount of floor area that you can put on that parcel?
So it's tightened up from what it was before.
Mm-hmm.
By Okay, and then just again, for people watching, this meant an increase in the zone capacity in the Elliott Street corridor and the Blue Hills Parkway corridor by
Yes.
400 and some units, was it?
Yep, so that was
Or 393?
393 increase. So you can see across the Elliott Street corridor and Blue Hills Parkway, the kind of individual increases for those different tiers and for the Blue Hills Parkway. And then the total sort of increase in the number of units that are allowable in those areas is just shy of 400, and the decrease from the East Milton subdistricts was on the order of 450.
Okay, thanks.
Great. So we're almost at 10. Is this a good breaking point? Or were there any other
No.
questions from members that we'd like to let Zoe and Matt and JT work on some additional refinement?
I'm fine now as a breaking point.
Yeah, just to be clear, Zoe's gonna come back with a statute plan for next meeting?
Correct.
All right, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, then I'm fine
Do
too.
that. So we should probably schedule our next meeting.
I was gonna say that. Let me.
Yeah, so it's, we have, obviously, we're meeting on Thursday. We have MBTA on our agenda, but it's Sean's going to be away. He's going to be out of town and out of the country, actually. But we should probably schedule something, maybe that our off week, which would be the first week in April. If members were,
So the 3rd would be a Thursday, so that would be just
would that work for
a week and a half for you two? Is that enough?
Yeah, that's, I think these revisions we can handle relatively quickly. I'm almost, and JT and Matthew, please speak up if this is after. I'm concerned about timeline. I want to get revisions back to you as quickly as we can. I'm wondering, Matthew and JT, do you think it's possible for us to do the 27th? I know, Sean, you're not going to be present, but maybe we could present the content and you could relay your feedback as a follow-up.
Sure. That'd be fine for me. That'd be fine. And I'm not here next week either. Meredith.
Right. That's right. You will be gone either way. So,
right.
But yeah, why don't we have it on the agenda currently for the 27th? So if you have some updates, that I think that would be great. Our agenda's fairly light on Thursday. So
is that something, Matthew and JT, are you available on the this Thursday evening?
I'm not. I'm out of town, but I can power through the updates regardless on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Okay. And Matthew, what about you?
I may not be available, but so up to you.
Okay, why don't we let's tentatively hold that time, and I'll do what I can with our team to get you some updates so that you at least have something to consider. And if it makes sense for me to present, I will do so. And then let's see if we can identify one other meeting that's early in April as an insurance if we need some more time to tighten things up before it goes out for public review on things.
And should we ask Cheyenne if she or Zoe to reach out to UTL to see if the Ice House site, it's a smaller site, but it's something that would make sense, I think, to look at. And maybe that might help us offset some.
We can coordinate over email to confirm the specifics of that site and look at it along with these other sites that we've just discussed. Do you have a sense of what the number of units?
There's 54 units there currently.
54, yeah.
And would you want to zone for more than that or roughly aligned with that?
Maybe a little bit more, a little bit higher, but roughly not too much higher. I think
maybe like 60 or 70.
maximum?
70.
Yeah, if it took off some of the other impacted areas. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Okay, so I'll pencil in the 27th this Thursday for me to join you. And then is there a time that we could pencil in between the 27th and your standing meeting on the 10th?
The 3rd, which we just had mentioned. Thursday, April 3rd. Or Monday, April 7th.
And Matthew and JT, how's the 3rd for you all?
That is, I'm sorry, which day of the week?
That's a Thursday.
Thursday of next week.
Yeah, that works for me.
That's probably fine.
Yeah.
All right, let's hold that then as our backup.
Okay.
So nothing on the 7th, the 3rd?
Is that good for other members? And that would only be MBTA. So
what day? Monday the 7th?
no, Thursday the 3rd.
Okay, yeah.
That would be only if you are not able to review on Thursday, Zoe, or is this in addition to Thursday?
Or if we are not resolved, like basically, I think for you guys to keep to your timeline by early April, you need to be able to share options with the public, right? Like that, we need to be at the point where it's discrete options, not like.
All right. So should we schedule a public forum? Is that what you're anticipating this would be? We should probably get that.
Yeah, I'm basically anticipating like this meeting on the 3rd is like our last chance to like, if there's any, if we meet on, let's say we meet on the 27th and there's like 2 more things you want us to like tweet.
Yeah. Okay.
I need to be able to do that and bring it back to you for you to feel comfortable going.
So when is school vacation week? Is it the
I don't
21st?
know. Is the 3rd realistic? With Sean being away, I don't think it's a realistic expectation that we will have everything buttoned up on the 3rd. I would think that we would need at least the 10th for the full board to be there to discuss.
So
we still would have that. We still would have that meeting, Maggie.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm thinking we try and schedule a public forum the week of the 14th because it's school vacation week, the week of the 21st. And if we do have a
we
meeting
want to be able to refine on the 24th. So I was going to suggest Thursday the 17th.
Yeah, for a public forum.
For the public forum.
Okay.
But what we could do, so Sean could be there, Maggie, because rather than having Sean miss the 27th and the 3rd, maybe we do meet on Monday the 7th. Sean, you're just getting back. I know how.
I'll be ready.
Busy.
That's fine. I'll be ready.
Would that be okay if we move instead of meeting on the 3rd, meet on the 7th, just to allow Sean to be there for the conversation?
I think I can do that. I think I'm seeing a conflict for Matthew.
I have another public meeting. Yeah.
And the 10th, Meredith, you're saying the 7th and the 10th?
Yeah. 7th just for UTL.
Sorry.
Would that be enough time in between the 7th and the 10th rather than the 3rd and the 10th?
Yeah, I think that's fine. As long as we know it's coming, we can do and we're at this point in the process where it's refinements, not like whole new concepts. I think that turnaround is fine.
Okay. Well, I can do the 7th.
One of these that Matthew can join for them. So it sounds like, Matthew, the best chance for you to join is on the 3rd or the 10th. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so maybe we assume
and if JT could be there on the 7th too, maybe that would be helpful.
JT, does that work for you? It looks like you don't have a conflict in terms of what I'm seeing, but I know that there might be some things that are not in my.
The 7th works. The 7th works for me.
Okay.
Okay.
And then we'll tentatively start looking at doing a posting, which we'll need to be doing soon, Cheyenne, is if we do a public forum, we would want to.
Yeah, we'd have to do about 2 weeks in advance.
Start getting that word out. Yeah.
2 weeks from when? The 10th?
I think 2 weeks prior to whenever the date
Yeah.
is.
So like the week of
I thought we were talking about the 17th for the forum, so that we have the 10th for discussion.
17th would be the forum. Yeah. So we can, I'll work with Cheyenne and Julia on that and getting it advertised.
So where did we settle? Are we doing the 3rd or the 7th?
7th and then the 10th.
Okay.
And the 17th. And hopefully the
Sean's
20th,
back, I'm
Thursday.
sorry, because Sean's back on the 7th, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, I think it's just important for the full board to be there for this stuff.
Right.
I'm available on the 7th. That's fine.
Okay.
And then for I'm just writing this down, 7th, 10th, and then Matthew, if we were to do the public forum on the 17th, is that workable for you? I think it's
Yeah.
okay for me to take the planning board meetings, but I want to make sure that you're there for the forum.
And how,
Yep.
how many public forums? Just one?
Well, depending on the feedback we get,
This
yeah,
needs to,
because then we'll have to go back and refine.
this needs to go to basically select board and warrant committee in early May.
Right.
So after the forum, there would be a short amount of time for revision. Zoe, as far as language for the zoning, we had a certain amount of or a certain amount of language that was in the 2023 approved, which it would still apply, I would think.
Yeah, I think the vast majority of that is still relevant and applicable. Obviously, if we do new districts, it would need to be updated to reflect those new districts. And we've obviously changed parameters within the districts. That zoning was authored by town staff with our input on the metrics. So I think that would be the same process we'd be looking at going forward. We would provide that level of like review and oversight and metrics that align with the updated approach that we've been refining with you all.
And then the submission for pre-adoption review.
Yeah, so this is something that the state had put out at the outset of this whole process. It was really intended for them to manage the crunch time that came at the end of 2024 when there was a convergence of deadlines for many, many, many communities. Now that there are fewer communities, they have articulated that they can be a little bit more flexible with that review, but it's still like, it's as quickly as they can get it back to us, but there isn't a guarantee that they can turn it around in like a few days. We need to give them some lead time. So I think as soon as it's clear to us that there's like maybe 3 or 4 options that we're evaluating, like an adjacent statute, a 25% rapid transit, one that we share those with them for their review in a more formal capacity. So I think I would hope that when we conclude our meeting on the 10th, that we're in a position to share that information with the state for them to review and provide feedback to us in tandem with the public feedback that you're facilitating.
Great. Okay, that's great. Thank you all for all your work on this. And thank you for those who are watching and who attended tonight. So I think that's good. All right, so you can, Zoe, just keep Cheyenne updated if you're going to be able to make it. We've got it on the agenda, so it can be whatever you have would be great. If you could provide an update on Thursday, that would be terrific.
Yep. can do.
Even if it's brief. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I think at this time, that's our final business. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn if other members are ready.
I'll make a
make
motion to adjourn.
Oh, go ahead, Cheryl.
All right, so I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Jim, was that a second?
Sure, second.
Okay. Roll call since we're online. Jim,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Maggie,
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Great. Terrific.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Everybody. Thank you,
Night.
Zoe.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yep.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, JT. Thank you, Matt.
You all take
Appreciate
care.
it.
Have a good night.
You too now.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.